Get comfortable. Pull your blanket up a little, turn the lights down low. Let the sounds of wherever you are settle into the background. Because tonight we are going somewhere very specific. And the journey is long, and the best way to take it is slowly, without hurry, in the particular quiet that comes when the day is finally over. We are going to Springfield. Not the Springfield you already know from 36 seasons of opening credits and couch gags and Homer doing something that defies the laws of physics. Not the one with the jokes you can recite from memory or the quotes you still use in ordinary conversation or the specific emotional warmth of a show you have been watching since you were young enough that you did not even know what you were watching. You were just watching, taking it in, letting it become part of the furniture of how your imagination works. We are going to the Springfield underneath that one. The one that has been building, quietly and with the patience of something that knows it will eventually be found, since the 17th of December 1989, in the spaces between the punchlines. Behind the warmth, underneath the rhythm of a family you have spent decades getting to know. The show has been leaving things there, not hiding them, not exactly, leaving them. In places where most people walk past without slowing down, because the comedy is too good and the warmth is too real and the distraction is too well constructed for the thing underneath to get much attention, tonight we pay attention. We are going to rank every major unsolved mystery in The Simpsons by a very specific criterion. How hard the show worked to ensure you would never stop and examine it carefully. We start at number 12, the mystery buried deepest inside a single beautiful moment, and we work toward number 1, which is the thing that all of the other mysteries are, in the end, circling. The thing at the center. It will take a while. These things take a while when you do them properly. And properly, tonight, means slowly, without rushing toward the point, letting each mystery breathe before we move to the next one. So settle in. The family will be on the couch when we get there. They always are. Section 1, ranked number 12. The mystery of Maggie's first word and the silence that has lasted ever since. Rank number 12. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. The show hid this one inside a moment so warm and so perfectly constructed that pausing to examine it would have felt almost rude. 10 out of 10 for concealment. We begin quietly, the way Maggie Simpson has always existed in this show. Present, watching, saying nothing. Let's set the scene. It is 1992. Season 4, Episode 13. Brother, can you spare 2 dimes? An episode that most people remember for other reasons. Herb Powell, Homer's half-brother, returning with a scheme involving a device to translate babies' needs into words. But this is not the mystery. The mystery is in the episode's final moments. A grace note placed at the end of the story the way the best episodes place things at their ends. Not as a punchline, not as a plot point, but as something simply true. Maggie Simpson opens her mouth, and she says, "Daddy." The voice the show used for this moment was Elizabeth Taylor's, not a sound-alike, not a budget alternative, not someone whose voice vaguely resembled the quality they wanted. Elizabeth Taylor, Academy Award winner, one of the most recognized women in the 20th century, a voice that carried decades of a specific kind of cultural weight. She leaned into a microphone on behalf of a yellow cartoon baby in a one-piece jumpsuit and whispered a single word that, in the context the show had built for it, landed with the precision of something genuine. Homer heard it. And his face changed. The show's animators are extraordinary at this specific thing, the moment when Homer's face stops being a comedy vehicle and becomes a window. The practiced blankness drops. The eyes go soft. Something that the character usually keeps sealed away surfaces briefly, and you believe it completely, because the show has spent 4 seasons building the specific love Homer has for his children into the bedrock of his characterization, and when it surfaces real. He heard his youngest daughter's first word, and it was him. And the episode ends. The credits roll. The warmth carries you out of the episode, and the next episode begins. And Maggie is silent again? Not for that episode. Not for that season. Not across any subsequent season, across any subsequent year, across what is now more than 3 additional decades of this show continuing to run. Maggie did not speak again in any regular, canonical episode in a way that became part of her ongoing characterization. The word happened. The moment was real. And then the vault closed. And she went back to the pacifier and the high chair and the enormous eyes and the watching. This is a mystery. Let's be precise about why. If the production explanation were the complete explanation, if we could simply say that this was a stunt casting moment, a promotional event, a one-time use of a famous voice that was never intended to open, a developmental door in the character, then the mystery would be thin, almost non-existent. The show does stunt casting all the time. The show does things for promotional purposes that are never referenced again. This would simply be one of those things, and we could note it and move on. But the production explanation only addresses why the show made the choice it made. It does not address what the choice means within the logic of the show's own world. And within that world, what it means is this. Maggie can speak. She demonstrated this capability, and she then chose, across every subsequent episode, to not use it. That is a choice. Choices have reasons. So what is Maggie's reason? The question requires sitting with what Maggie's life actually looks like from the inside. Not from the outside, not from the audience's perspective, not from the perspective of the family that loves her and tends to her needs and cycles through its daily chaos with Maggie observing from the high chair. From inside, from the position of the only member of the Simpson family whose observational vantage point is never compromised by their own participation in the drama, Maggie is, functionally, a spectator. She is present in every family scene. She is fed and clothed, and sometimes carried, and occasionally at the center of storylines that pivot around her. But in the ordinary flow of the family's life, she watches. She takes in everything. She processes the data of her household with the continuous, unfiltered attention of someone who has no other way of engaging with it. What has she observed? She has watched her father leave for work every morning and come back diminished in ways so gradual and so consistent that they have become invisible to everyone else in the household. She has watched his intelligence, the intelligence that surfaces briefly and brightly whenever the crayon is hypothetically removed, whenever the radiation fog briefly lifts, remain mostly inaccessible, sealed away by damage that nobody around him understands or addresses. She has watched him come home exhausted from a job he is not equipped to understand, in a building that is slowly poisoning him, and announce that it was a fine day. She has watched her brother try to express himself. This is worth dwelling on. Bart is an attempt. Across 36 years, Bart Simpson has been trying, with the specific energy of a 10-year-old who cannot quite articulate the thing he is reaching for, to communicate something about who he is and what he needs, and why the world as it is configured does not quite accommodate him. He tries through pranks, through noise, through the specific verbal creativity that makes him, in his best moments, very funny in the way that intelligent people who have been told they are not intelligent often become funny through lateral thinking, through finding the joke that reveals the absurdity of the system rather than the joke that plays within it. And the world responds to his attempts with detention and remedial tracks and a consistent message from every institutional authority in his life that his particular mode of intelligence is not the kind the world has room for. Maggie watched this. She also watched Lisa. Lisa Simpson is, by any measure that matters to the people who should be measuring these things, one of the most exceptional children in the recorded history of Springfield. Her intelligence is real, documented, externally validated, and extraordinary. She has produced work that startles specialists. She has understood things that the adults around her are still figuring out. She has been the smartest person in most rooms she has entered for the entirety of the show's run. And the consistent return on that intelligence, in the specific environment of Springfield, has been isolation. Mockery, often. Dismissal, regularly. The particular loneliness of being the person who can see what everyone else is missing and having nowhere to put that knowledge that does not make you a problem. Lisa speaks. She speaks constantly, loudly, with precision and urgency. She raises her hand. She submits her findings. She advocates and argues and produces analysis and shares conclusions and tries continuously to participate in the world around her through the most developed version of the capability she has. And the world around her mostly does not hear her. Maggie watched this. From the high chair, from her spot in the corner of the room during family dinners, from her position in the car during family trips, from everywhere she has been carried and placed and left while the adults and near adults around her conducted the ongoing crisis of being the Simpsons in Springfield. She watched all of it. She took in the data. She conducted her own analysis. And then she made her decision. The decision is this: the cost-benefit calculus of speaking in this household, in this town, with this family as her reference population, does not favor speech. The returns are poor. Lisa speaks constantly and is heard intermittently. Bart speaks in the only register available to him and is punished for it. Homer speaks with open-hearted sincerity and creates chaos. Marge speaks carefully and deliberately and is still the person whose words carry the most weight and get the most attention, but even Marge's careful speech is only partially effective. She manages the household rather than transforming it, which means the speaking produces maintenance rather than change. Against this evidence, silence has substantial advantages. Silence keeps you from being targeted. Silence keeps you from being evaluated. Silence means your capabilities remain unassessed, which means they also remain unthreatened. Nobody dismisses intelligence they have not been given the chance to measure. Nobody punishes a child who has not yet made enough noise to attract punishment. And there is one more advantage that Maggie, who has been watching everything, has clearly identified. Silence makes you invisible. And invisibility, in Springfield, is the most effective protection available. Look at the moments when Maggie acts decisively and effectively. The shooting of Mr. Burns. The daycare rebellion in The Longest Daycare. The multiple instances across the show's run where she intervenes in a family crisis in ways that should not be possible for a one-year-old. In every single one of these moments, she succeeds partly because nobody is watching her. Nobody expects her to be dangerous. Nobody expects her to be competent. Nobody expects anything from her except the ordinary behavior of an infant. She has cultivated that expectation. She has cultivated it deliberately, with the strategic precision of someone who understands that the best armor is the one nobody knows you are wearing. And this brings us back to the word. "To Daddy," whispered in Elizabeth Taylor's voice in the final moments of a Season 4 episode, and never repeated. She spent the word. She spent it on the thing that was worth spending it on the person she loves, at the moment when saying the word would mean the most, in the form most likely to be received correctly. And then she sealed the vault. Because spending it again, in a different context, for a different purpose, would diminish it, would make it ordinary, would make it the kind of thing that gets said and then gets lost in the noise. And also because speaking more, in Springfield, would require her to participate in a game that the evidence around her suggests is rigged. There is one more dimension to the Elizabeth Taylor casting that rewards attention, though it requires a slightly looser interpretive stance. Taylor was, by 1992, someone whose voice carried a specific kind of maturity. Not just the maturity of age, though that was present. The maturity of someone who had lived fully in a way that left marks, whose experience was audible in the quality of how she spoke. When she voiced that one word, she was lending Maggie something beyond just the sounds she was lending, her the weight of a whole life pressed into a single syllable. Daddy, said by the voice of a woman who had been a public figure for 40 years, said on behalf of a baby who would not speak again. The show chose that voice for that moment because it understood, at least instinctively, what it was depicting. Not a developmental milestone in a cartoon baby's language acquisition. Something older than that. Something that was already complete in the moment of its expression. Maggie knew what she was saying. She knew it fully, in the way the show's most observant character would know it. She said it once, correctly, with the perfect voice, to the perfect person, at the perfect moment. And then she went back to watching Bart, watching Lisa, watching her parents, watching the house and the street and the town and the show, waiting for whatever she is waiting for. We will come back to her. She appears again later in this ranking. But for now, let her keep the silence she has chosen. It is the most sophisticated choice anyone in her family has ever made. The most honest response to the available evidence. She knows what talking costs in Springfield. She has known since she was old enough to watch. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are, whatever the hour, drop it in the comments. The city, the time, just a line of it. Someone in the same dark is watching this same video and they would like to know they are not alone in the quiet. And if you are staying for the full ranking, subscribe now so you do not miss a section when the next one lands. Section 2, ranked number 11. The Sideshow Bob Problem. The justice system, the revolving door, and who actually benefits when it keeps opening. Rank, number 11. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 9 out of 10. The show hid this one inside the warmth of 30 years of audience love for one of its greatest recurring characters. By the time you might start examining the structural question, you are already too fond of him to want the answer to change anything. Let us talk about a man who has been trying to kill a child for 30 years and keeps being given the opportunity to try again. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is, by any objective accounting, a serious criminal. He is also one of the most beloved recurring characters in the show's history, and these two facts have lived together in comfortable coexistence for so long that most people have stopped noticing the tension between them. The love is genuine. He is theatrical and erudite and deeply, magnificently committed to his own villainy, and his episodes are usually among the stronger efforts of any season he appears in. The criminality is also genuine. The documented record includes framing an innocent man for armed robbery, imprisoning that man while stealing his livelihood, multiple attempts on the life of a 10-year-old child, electoral fraud at a scale that overturned a democratic election, assisting in a plot to bomb a television station, and, in at least one canonical instance, an actual completed homicide. And he keeps getting parole. The show treats this as a running gag. Bob is released. He finds Bart. He fails. He is reincarcerated. The cycle repeats. The audience has been trained to receive this cycle as comedy to feel the familiar pleasure of a beloved formula delivered reliably, and that training is so complete, so deeply embedded in the show's relationship with its audience, that very few people ever stop and ask the obvious structural question: why does Springfield's justice system keep letting him out? Before we answer that, let us map the full record. The first time Bob appears, he is Krusty the Clown's sidekick. He frames Krusty for armed robbery, takes over the show, and begins broadcasting what he describes as culturally enriching content to children, canceling cartoons, replacing them with programs he approves of. This is a crime that harms both the falsely imprisoned Krusty and, in its way, every child in Springfield who has the cartoons taken from them. Bart catches him, Bob goes to prison. Release number 1 occurs off-screen, between seasons. The mechanism is never established. Bob simply exits prison and immediately begins the organized campaign to murder Bart that will define the next several decades of his existence. He attempts murder. He is foiled. Back to prison. Release number 2. Election fraud. Bob runs for mayor, wins through systematic ballot stuffing, and briefly controls Springfield's municipal government. This is a serious crime against the democratic process of an entire community. He is caught. Back to prison. Release number 3 involves the Witness Protection Program, which is interesting in itself. Someone has decided that Bob's cooperation with something is worth placing him in a federal protection scheme, which means someone in the federal justice apparatus has evaluated his usefulness and found him valuable enough to protect. He gets a new identity, a small town, a wife, a child. The domesticity does not take. He finds Bart. He tries murder. He is caught. Back to prison. And on, through more seasons than most people bother to count. Each time the release happens with slightly different justification: a sympathetic parole board, new evidence, a technicality, some form of rehabilitation claim, but the pattern is identical. The door opens. Bob walks out. The story begins again. Now ask the structural question seriously. In any functional justice system, Sideshow Bob would be serving consecutive life sentences, or something adjacent to them. The combination of his documented crimes framing, multiple attempted murders, election fraud, conspiracy, actual homicide, places him in a category of danger that parole boards are specifically designed to address. The purpose of a parole board is to assess whether a person presents ongoing risk to the community. Bob has demonstrated, repeatedly, across multiple releases, that he presents ongoing risk to a very specific member of the community. The word repeat alone should be disqualifying. But the parole board keeps releasing him. Someone is making that decision. Multiple someones, across multiple administrations, across multiple decades. Someone looks at Bob's file, reads his history, and signs the paperwork. Let's think about who has both the means and the motive to influence this outcome. Bob's family has resources. The show establishes this in fragments. His brother Cecil is a successful civil engineer, not a working-class Springfield resident, but someone who has reached a professional level, implying significant education and the kind of institutional access that professional status provides. The family has lawyers, presumably. the family has connections. In a town where Burns's resources can insulate 342 safety violations from serious legal consequence, the idea that a well-connected family cannot arrange periodic parole for its most academically distinguished and operatically murderous member requires considerably more explanation than the show provides. But there is a secondary reading that the show's structure supports without ever stating explicitly. Follow the aftermath of each Bob release. Every single time Bob escapes or is released and comes after Bart, the Simpson family responds with complete and total mobilization. The entire household goes into crisis mode. Homer and Marge become wholly occupied with protecting Bart. Every resource, every relationship, every piece of attention the family has is directed at surviving the specific threat that Bob represents. Other things, the plant's safety record, the water quality, the educational system's treatment of Lisa, the question of what is actually happening in Springfield and why recede entirely. The family cannot examine the town when they are running from a man in a tuxedo trying to kill their son. And when the crisis resolves, when Bob is back in custody and the family has survived, what happens? They exhale. They are grateful. They are tired. They return to their ordinary lives with the residual adrenaline of near-death replacing, for a while, any other kind of anxiety. And Homer goes back to the power plant. And the family stops asking whatever questions they were beginning to ask before Bob showed up. And Springfield continues, undisturbed, doing what it does. This pattern repeats across every Bob episode across 3 decades. The arrival of the threat, the mobilization, the resolution, the return to the status quo. And at every resolution, the family is right back where it was in the house, in the town, not looking at the things that would be more threatening to the Springfield power structure than an operatic murderer. Because Sideshow Bob, for all his theatrical danger, is not actually a threat to Springfield's power structure. He is a threat to one family. He is local, targeted, manageable. Burns is still in the plant. Quimby is still in office. The contamination is still in the water. None of that is affected by Bob's episodic campaigns against the Simpsons. A town where the population's anxiety is periodically channeled toward a dramatic, personalized, theatrical villain is a town whose anxiety is not being directed at the structural sources of its actual suffering. That is useful to anyone with an interest in the structural sources of the town's suffering remaining unaddressed. And the people with the most interest in that are the same people with the resources to make phone calls to parole boards. Again, the show never states this. The show loves Bob as a recurring antagonist and has no interest in making him a pawn of a larger conspiracy. He is not a pawn. He is a person with a genuine fixation on a specific child and a theatrical flair for villainy that makes him wonderful television. But the structural effect of his recurrence is real, regardless of whether anyone has ever consciously arranged it. Every time the door opens and Bob walks out, Springfield gets a pressure valve, a dramatic threat that focuses the audience's anxiety on something spectacular and solvable, rather than something structural and permanent. And the status quo is preserved, episode after episode, for 30 years. There is one more dimension to this that deserves attention. The character of Bob's parole record, the specific combination of serious crimes and repeated releases, is only possible in a justice system that is itself deeply compromised. Not incompetent, compromised. There is a difference. An incompetent justice system would release Bob because it failed to assess his risk correctly. A compromised justice system releases Bob because someone with influence has decided that the cost of keeping him is higher than the cost of the risk he presents. Springfield's justice system, as the show depicts it across 36 seasons, is both. Chief Wiggum's incompetence is genuine and deep. But underneath the incompetence, the show has also depicted a system that consistently fails to address the crimes of the powerful Burns, Quimby, Fat Tony, while occasionally making a show of addressing the crimes of others. The system is not merely broken. It is broken in specific directions that align with the interests of specific people, and those people find periodic parole for Sideshow Bob useful, regardless of whether they ever said so explicitly. That is the mystery at number 11. The revolving door is not a failure. It is a feature of a justice system that was never designed to address the sources of Springfield's actual danger. Bob is the thing the system can see. Burns is the thing the system has decided not to look at. And every time Bob goes back to prison, The audience feels the satisfaction of a problem solved, and the larger problems rest exactly where they were. Section 3 ranked number 10. The death of Snowball I, the drunk driver who stayed, and the grief that became a naming convention. Rank number 10. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 8 out of 10. Hidden inside backstory, the category of events that happened before the show began and are therefore always filtered through the comfortable haze of history rather than the discomfort of present tense depiction. There was a white cat. Her name was Snowball. Not Snowball 1, the number 1 came later, retroactively, when there was a successor to differentiate from. When she was alive, she was just Snowball, a white cat belonging to a family in Springfield. Loved by the family, presumably in the way families love pets, not loudly, not ceremonially, but as part of the texture of daily life, present in the background of ordinary mornings, part of the household in the way that animals become part of households when they stay long enough. She was hit by a car. The driver was drunk. She died. This happened before the 17th of December, 1989, which is when the show began. Before the pilot. Before the audience was present. Before any of the characters who would eventually populate the show had been given the chance to become real to us. Snowball the First exists entirely in backstory, in the reference Marge makes to her in a second season episode, in the number appended to her successor, in the permanent implication of her name whenever the family's current cat is called Snowball 2. She is a ghost. A ghost with a name that is the name of the cat who replaced her, numbered to indicate the replacement. And the mystery at number 10 lives in 3 questions that the show placed in the background of its world and then never turned to look at directly. The first question: who was the driver? Springfield is a small town. The show has been building its population across 36 seasons into a dense web of specific individuals whose lives intersect, whose histories overlap, whose presence in any given location is usually explainable in terms of their relationship to other people in the town. Almost every named character has a connection to almost every other named character. The social geography of Springfield is, by this point, extensively mapped. The drunk driver who killed Snowball 1 is a Springfield resident. This is not speculation. It is the logical consequence of the show's geography. The cat was killed on a street in Springfield. A drunk driver on that street in Springfield is almost certainly a person who lives in or near Springfield. Given the size of the town and the density of its social connections, this person is almost certainly someone the Simpson family has been in proximity to at some point during the show's run. Maybe many points. Maybe regularly. This person has been carrying that knowledge for the entire run of the show, walking around Springfield, existing in the same community as the family whose pet they killed while drunk, possibly shopping at the Quick E-Mart, possibly drinking at Moe's. There is a specific dark comedy in the image of a drunk driver who killed a family's pet finding their way back to the same bar that likely contributed to the incident. Possibly living on the same street. Possibly someone the family would recognize by name. And the family never found out, because nobody told them. Because in Springfield, the mechanisms that would surface this kind of information, a police investigation, a witness with a conscience, the simple pressure of community knowledge eventually finding its way to the relevant ears, do not function for small things. For the death of a cat. For the grief of a family that named their next cat with a number. The second question: why did the family name the replacement cat Snowball 2? There is a psychology to this naming choice that the show never examines, but that anyone who has worked in grief or studied memorial practices would recognize. When you replace a lost thing and give the replacement the same name with a numerical suffix, you are making a specific claim about continuity. You are saying, this is not a new chapter. This is the same chapter continuing under modified circumstances. The thing we lost is not gone, it is now this, and the number acknowledges the transition while insisting on the fundamental sameness. This is a grief strategy. It is the strategy of the person who cannot fully accept the loss, who finds in the continuity of the name a way of keeping the original present even in its absence. The number is the only concession to reality. It admits that this is technically different while refusing to absorb the full weight of what the difference means. And the family has been using this strategy since before the show began. It was already in place by the first episode. They were already living inside the gentle fiction that the black cat answering to Snowball 2 was in some meaningful sense a continuation of the white cat they had lost. The show never commented on this. It accepted the Snowball 2 naming as a background fact of the Simpson household and moved on. But then, later in the show's run, something happens that exposes the strategy in a way the show treats as dark comedy without quite absorbing the darkness. Snowball 2 is killed by a car, driven this time by the veterinarian, Dr. Hibbert, in an episode that handles the death with the brisk efficiency the show applies to events that would otherwise require genuine emotional processing. The family attempts to replace her. The replacement dies. Another replacement. Another death. The sequence accelerates into a montage of cat deaths that the show plays for laughs. In the way montages of accelerated misfortune are always funny, the speed of it, the escalation, the refusal to let any individual death land. And then Bart makes the suggestion that the episode has been building toward, just call the new one Snowball 2 and pretend nothing happened. The family agrees. The count resets. The Snowball 5 they have acquired becomes Snowball 2 again. The sequence of losses between the original 2 and this new 2 is simply erased from the record. The stable fiction is restored. The family returns to the version of their household that contains a cat named Snowball 2, and the cats named Snowball 3, IV, V, and Coltrane simply cease to have existed in any meaningful sense. This is the show depicting, directly and comedically and without comment, the mechanism that Springfield uses to handle everything difficult, not just the cats, everything. The dome descends and is forgotten. The plant's safety violations are exposed and are forgotten. The corruption is revealed and is forgotten. The truth about Skinner's identity is established and is legally forbidden from acknowledgement. Springfield's relationship to loss and to history is the relationship of a community that has learned, through long practice, to restore the last stable version, rather than to integrate what happened and move forward. Snowball the First is the template for this, the original loss, the event that established the pattern. And the drunk driver who started the whole sequence is still in Springfield, walking through the Quickie Mart, parking on the same streets where the family's cats still walk. The third question is the smallest and in some ways the most haunting. What did Snowball I actually look like in life? The show tells us she was white. Snowball, the name, is a color reference. But beyond that, beyond the name and the color and the cause of death, there is nothing. No image, no backstory, no episode that dramatizes the family's relationship with her. She is a gap in the show's history, present only as an absence, and that absence has been expressing itself through the number 2 on every single mention of the family's current cat since the show began. She was white, she was loved, she died, and the family gave the next one her name with a number appended, and they have been maintaining that small, quiet fiction ever since. That is the mystery at number 10. Not dramatic, not conspiratorial. Just a death that predated the show, and a grief that became a naming convention, and a drunk driver who has been living in the same town as his consequence for 36 years. Section 4, ranked number 9. Fat Tony and the Invisible Government. What the Springfield mob is really doing and why it never gets addressed. Rank. Number 9. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 8 out of 10. Hidden behind 30 years of Italian-American mob comedy so effectively funny that the structural reading of Fat Tony's function was never separated from the genre jokes that housed it. There is a shadow government in Springfield, and it has been visible in the show's background for decades. Marion Anthony D'Amico, known to everyone in Springfield as Fat Tony, is one of the show's most consistently present recurring figures. Not a season regular, not a main cast member, but present across dozens of episodes across the show's entire run with a persistence that goes beyond cameo and approaches something like institutional status. He runs Springfield's organized crime operation. He controls the illegal gambling networks, the bootlegging, the protection arrangements, the stolen goods distribution chains, the various off-the-books services that exist in the space between what Springfield's official economy can provide and what its population actually wants. He does all of this completely openly, not covertly, not in the shadows. Fat Tony does not operate through elaborate concealment or sophisticated cover. His suits are expensive and distinctive. His associates are obvious. His manner announces itself. He attends public events, patronizes ordinary establishments, moves through Springfield with the specific ease of a man who has never experienced a morning where he checked over his shoulder. He is known. He has always been known. Chief Wiggum knows who he is. Mayor Quimby knows who he is. The FBI, which has appeared in Springfield multiple times for multiple investigations, knows who he is. Nothing ever sticks. The comedy reading of this is, the police are incompetent, the mayor is corrupt. This is how organized crime works in fiction and in real communities, and the show is using it as background and as a platform for jokes about mob archetypes. The comedy works because it is recognizable. Most people understand, at some intuitive level, that organized crime in real towns tends to persist because it has made itself useful to enough of the right people. The jokes land. They have been landing for 30 years. And the landing is exactly what has prevented most people from looking at what the jokes are built on. Because Fat Tony's persistence in Springfield is not just a function of institutional incompetence or comedy genre convention, it is a function of his specific relationship to the other pillars of Springfield's power structure. Let's be precise about what that structure looks like when you map it. At the top of the legitimate economy, Charles Montgomery Burns. His nuclear power plant is the primary employer and the primary generator of Springfield's economic activity. His monopoly on electrical power is also, functionally, a monopoly on the conditions of daily life in the town. He does not just employ people, he provides the infrastructure that the entire community depends on, which gives him a leverage over Springfield's residents that goes beyond the ordinary power of an employer. At the top of the political structure, Mayor Quimby. Openly corrupt, consistently re-elected, permanently ensconced in an office that he occupies through a combination of name recognition, political machinery, and the general tolerance of a population that has been taught, through long exposure, to expect corruption from its leaders and to factor it in as a constant rather than addressing it. At the top of the informal economy, Fat Tony. His operation runs in the spaces that Burns's plant and Quimby's administration do not reach the discretionary consumption that Springfield's legal economy either prohibits or prices out of accessibility for ordinary residents. He provides what people want, at prices they can pay, with the reliability of an institution. These three pillars of Springfield's power structure are not in competition, they are complementary. Burns needs political cover for his plant's documented violations. Quimby provides it. Quimby needs financial resources for his political operation. Burns and, to some extent, Tony provide it. Tony needs operational freedom. Quimby ensures that Wiggum's department maintains its traditional non-engagement with his activities. All three of them need the population to remain manageable, sufficiently employed, sufficiently entertained, sufficiently distracted, that civic organizing against any of them remains perpetually beyond the population's practical reach. They are, collectively, running the town. The show has scattered evidence for this across dozens of episodes without ever drawing the explicit connecting line. Each individual element, the Burns-Quimby connection, the Quimby-Wiggum dynamic, Fat Tony's untouchability, has been depicted in various episodes as a standalone comedy premise. But the structure they collectively constitute has never been the subject of a single episode. Because making it the subject of an episode would require acknowledging that Springfield is not just a quirky town with incompetent institutions. It would require acknowledging that Springfield's institutions are not failing accidentally. They are working as designed, for the people who benefit from the design. And now let's get specific about what Fat Tony actually provides that makes him useful to this structure rather than threatening to it. His operation runs on cash. Untraceable, unaccountable cash that flows through Springfield's informal economy in ways that have a stimulative effect on the general business environment. People with gambling winnings spend them at local businesses. People who can access bootleg products they want spend what they save on other things. The general circulation of economic activity that Fat Tony's operation maintains has secondary benefits that extend to legitimate businesses throughout the town. He also provides enforcement in situations where the legitimate justice system's strategic incompetence leaves gaps that someone with a different kind of authority can fill. Small disputes that Wiggum's department cannot or will not address get resolved, after a fashion, through the implicit presence of Tony's network. This is not justice in any meaningful sense, but it is a form of order, and order, even imperfect, expensive, morally compromised order, is something that communities in which the official institutions have failed will sometimes accept from whoever is offering it. Tony is offering it. And Springfield accepts, in the specific way that communities accept the presence of organized crime when they have nothing better to replace it with, and when the official institutions have made clear, through decades of non-engagement, that replacement is not forthcoming. And here is the most significant thing the show has shown you about this relationship in episodes scattered across 30 years, without ever drawing the obvious conclusion. Fat Tony and Homer Simpson have interacted. Not through adversarial confrontation, not the sideshow Bob dynamic where one is clearly the threat and the other the target. They have simply been in the same situation, on the same side of a problem, working toward the same immediate goal. And in these moments, the show depicts Homer interacting with Tony in exactly the way Homer interacts with everyone, with the open-hearted good faith of a man who cannot quite process the social architecture around him clearly enough to respond to it. With appropriate caution, Homer does not fear Tony the way he should. Not because Homer is brave, but because Homer's damaged perception of his own circumstances extends to the circumstances around him. He cannot clearly read the danger because he cannot clearly read anything clearly. And Tony, in these moments, does not quite know what to do with Homer's lack of appropriate caution. He is briefly, genuinely disarmed by sincerity offered by someone who has no idea what they are dealing with. This is funny. This is also the most accurate picture the show ever draws of how the machinery of Springfield's power structure depends on the population's incapacity to see it. Homer can stand in Fat Tony's presence, in Fat Tony's operation, and interact with him as though he were any other person in the room. Not because he is naive about organized crime in general, but because the specific damage the town has done to his cognition means he cannot connect the abstraction of mob boss to the specific reality of the man in front of him. The fog covers everything. And Tony, whose entire operation depends on the fog not lifting, benefits from Homer's impairment every bit as much as Burns does. He just benefits from it at a different level of the social structure, in a different sector of the economy, with a different set of tools. Springfield does not have a mob problem because organized crime is difficult to address. Springfield has a mob problem because the conditions that make organized crime addressable and engaged, informed, critically thinking population operating within functional, civic institutions have been systematically undermined for decades. Fat Tony did not create those conditions. He arrived after them, or alongside them, and found them hospitable. He is a consequence of Springfield's degradation rather than its cause. But he benefits from it, and he has an interest in its continuation. And that interest aligns, imperfectly but reliably, with the interests of everyone else at the top of Springfield's power structure. The show has been showing you this for 30 years. Dressed in comedy, voiced through mob archetypes that keep the audience laughing rather than looking. That is the mystery at number 9. The mob is not a background gag. It is the third leg of a stool that has been holding Springfield's power structure in place since before the show began. And the stool has never wobbled because the population sitting on it has never quite understood what it is made of. Section 5, ranked number 8. The Treehouse of Horror question. Why the show's most honest material lives in the place it labeled as not real. Rank number 8. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 7 out of 10. The show hid this one behind an explicit non-canon framing that the audience accepted so thoroughly and so immediately that most people never stopped to ask what the exemption was actually doing across 30 years of consistent use. Every October, The Simpsons produces a Treehouse of Horror episode. This has been happening since season 2, when the show first experimented with anthology horror content during the Halloween season. It has continued without interruption across the show's entire run through the golden era, through the years of declining quality that the internet has been debating for 2 decades, through every creative shift and writing staff rotation and tonal evolution the show has experienced. Whatever else changes about The Simpsons in any given period, October reliably delivers the horror anthology. The episodes are beloved. They are among the most cited in the canon, most discussed in fan communities, most enthusiastically received by the audience. When people compile their personal lists of the greatest Simpsons episodes, Treehouse entries appear regularly, and nobody questions their inclusion. They belong. And the show has always been very clear. None of it counts. These episodes are explicitly non-canonical. What happens inside the horror frame does not carry into the regular show. Characters who die in Treehouse segments are alive and well by the next regular episode, no explanation required. Revelations about the show's world that emerge from the horror content about character psychology, about the nature of the show's reality, about the darkness that lives underneath the family comedy format are sealed inside the Halloween container and cannot infect the surrounding episodes. The non-canon label is the permission structure. It is what makes the Treehouse of Horror possible. The label is also examined over 30 years of consistent application, doing something that nobody has quite named. Let's map the content of Treehouse of Horror episodes across the show's run with the specific question in mind. What categories of material consistently appear inside the non-canon container? The first consistent category is mortality. Characters die in Treehouse episodes with a directness and a regularity that the regular show never approaches. Not the cartoon resilience of Homer bouncing back from a cliff fall, which the regular show deploys constantly as visual grammar, a signal that this is a cartoon world where physics is negotiable and consequences are temporary. Actual deaths, moments where the show's world acknowledges that existence ends, that the people we follow are mortal, that the things that matter to them can be lost. Lisa dies. Marge dies. Bart dies across multiple segments in multiple years with a cheerful variety that becomes its own comedic category. Homer dies so often in the horror frames that his deaths carry an expectation. The audience waits for the Homer death the way they wait for the couch gag, knowing it is coming, enjoying the specific form it takes when it arrives. The regular show cannot do this. The regular show's characters are structurally protected from death because death would end the show or require the kind of reset that would undermine whatever narrative integrity the regular continuity maintains. The characters must survive because the show must continue. But within the Treehouse container, the protection is suspended and the characters exist in the full contingency of actual mortal creatures, and the audience feels this even knowing it does not count. The sensation is real even when the consequence is not. You watch Lisa die, and something registers that would not register in a regular episode. The non-canon label cannot prevent the emotional response. It only prevents the response from carrying forward. The second consistent category is ontological disruption moments, where the show's constructed reality breaks down, where the characters become aware of their own fictionality, where the arbitrariness of the world they inhabit is made visible rather than naturalized. These moments take different forms across different segments. Sometimes the characters look through the screen at the audience. Sometimes they discover that their world follows different rules than they believed. Sometimes the premise of the segment is built around the characters confronting the nature of their own existence in ways that the regular show's commitment to its internal consistency cannot accommodate. What would it mean if the Simpsons knew they were trapped? If they looked at their situation with full awareness, if Homer understood what the plant was doing to him, if Marge saw the whole picture of what the marriage required, if Lisa finally assembled the pieces she has been collecting for decades and could not change anything because the structure of the show prevents change, this is the kind of self-awareness the regular show cannot allow. But the Treehouse of Horror frames have gone here repeatedly. The most famous version of this is the occasional segment where the characters become aware they are characters, where the show looks at itself, using the horror frame as permission, and acknowledges the specific kind of trap that being a television family in a 36-year-old show represents. The third consistent category is the one that requires the most careful articulation: successful resistance. In the Treehouse of Horror episodes, the Simpson family and the people of Springfield sometimes fight back against the forces that organize their world. They resist alien invaders. They organize against tyrannical authority figures. They find the collective capacity for action that the regular show's Springfield population never demonstrates. The passive, amnesiac population that accepts everything in regular episodes becomes, in October, a population capable of recognizing its own oppression and doing something about it. This pattern is consistent enough across 3 decades to be structural rather than incidental. The show cannot depict its regular episode characters fighting back against Burns, against Quimby, against the structural conditions of their daily lives, because doing so would require it to acknowledge those conditions as worth fighting against, and acknowledging that would require following the fight to some conclusion, and any conclusion would change the show irreversibly. So the fights happen in October. In the horror framing, inside the non-canon container, where nothing has to carry forward. And then November comes. Now let's think about what this consistent pattern means about the show's relationship to its own content. By placing its most honest material inside the explicitly non-canonical Halloween episodes, the show has created a system for saying true things while retaining the ability to retract them. The darkness of Treehouse segments is real, the deaths register, the disruptions unsettle, the moments of resistance feel like they mean something. But the non-canon label is doing active psychological work on the audience, framing the content as Halloween fun rather than as the show's actual account of its own world. The darkness lands and is immediately filed under not real, and the regular show continues undisturbed. This is a sophisticated operation. Whether it was consciously designed or evolved organically from the practical need to manage tonal range across 36 seasons of a show that is fundamentally a family comedy, the effect is the same. The show can tell you what it actually knows about Springfield every October, and spend the rest of the year insisting it didn't. There is a specific Treehouse of Horror segment that makes this dynamic more visible than any other. In Treehouse of Horror 5, a segment called Time and Punishment follows Homer as he accidentally creates a time machine from a toaster, and each trip into the past produces a dramatically different present. Springfield, a sequence of alternate versions of the town that the show uses to demonstrate the contingency of what we normally treat as fixed. The segment concludes with Homer discovering a version of Springfield that is, by every meaningful measure, better than the real one. More just, more functional, better for the people who live in it. And Homer returns to the original Springfield anyway. He chooses the familiar imperfect world over the better unfamiliar one. Because the familiar imperfect world is his couch, his house, his family in the specific configuration he knows them, with all their specific imperfections exactly where he left them. This is played as comedy, the absurdist resolution of an escalating premise. The punchline that acknowledges Homer's attachment to his specific reality regardless of its objective quality. But underneath the comedy is the show's clearest, most direct statement of what it believes about the Simpson family and their relationship to Springfield. They are not in Springfield because Springfield is good. They are in Springfield because Springfield is theirs. The contamination and the corruption, and the institutional capture, and the managed forgetting, and the marriage that is held together by more than love, and the school that produces the workers, the plant needs all of it, is the specific texture of the world they have built and inhabited and become attached to across a permanent present that the floating timeline has made genuinely perpetual. You cannot improve Springfield without changing The Simpsons. You cannot change The Simpsons without ending the show. And the show, which loves its family and its town with the deep, complicated love of 36 years, will not end. So it says this in October, inside the non-canon exemption, and November comes, and everyone chooses the couch. The mystery at number 8 is not what the Treehouse of Horror episodes reveal. The content of the reveals is visible to anyone who watches carefully. The mystery is why the show chose to make these specific revelations consistently inside the container it could most easily retract. Because the show knows its own truth. It has known it since the early seasons. And it has chosen, with consistency, to tell that truth only when it has a label attached that lets everyone off the hook. You can carry both the October truth and the November fiction simultaneously. The show built you to do exactly that. It made the fiction warm enough, and the truth just barely visible enough, that most people live in the fiction and carry the truth somewhere underneath it, like a stone in a pocket, felt occasionally but seldom examined. That is what 36 years of Octobers has produced. The truth, labeled not real, felt but never fully acknowledged. And the family on the couch, every November, exactly where they were before. Section 6, ranked number 7, Abe Simpson's War. The record that keeps changing, the son who never noticed, and what Grandpa has been protecting all these years. Rank. Number 7. How badly the show wanted you to miss it, 7 out of 10. The show concealed this one inside the comedy of the unreliable elderly narrator, a premise so consistently and effectively funny that the unreliability became the joke rather than the subject of examination. Abraham Jebediah Simpson II served in World War II. This is a foundational biographical fact. Grandpa's military service is woven into his identity across the show's entire run, referenced in passing, dramatized in flashback, invoked as the source of the particular quality of authority he carries, even in his most diminished moments. He is a veteran. The war was real. The experience shaped him, and the shape it left on him determined the kind of father he would become, which determined the kind of son that father produced, which is the chain that connects something that happened in the 1940s to the specific configuration of the Simpson family right now, sitting on the couch in Springfield in the permanent present tense. The war is the origin story's origin story. And the more carefully you attend to how Grandpa tells it, the more it begins to dissolve. Not in the ordinary way that memories dissolve over time, the softening at the edges, the compressed chronology, the natural simplification that happens when complex experiences get retold enough times that the retelling becomes more real than the original. What happens to Grandpa's wartime record is something different. It is active contradiction. Version A and version B cannot both be true. He was in the Pacific Theater in one episode and definitively in Europe in another. A flashback sequence places him at a specific famous battle with enough specificity to make it canonical. A later episode set during the same period places him somewhere that cannot be reconciled with that placement. His unit designation changes, his rank changes. His specific acts of documented valor shift with each telling, as though the events themselves are plastic-shaped differently depending on who is in the room and what the moment requires. The production explanation is genuine, continuity error. 36 seasons of rotating writing staffs with no master timeline document for a secondary character's World War II service is the kind of thing that produces exactly this kind of inconsistency. Different writers needed Grandpa to have been in different places for different episodes and did not check what prior seasons had established. The contradictions are accidental. But the character explanation, the explanation that lives inside the show's world rather than in the writer's room, is more interesting and more true to what the show has actually built in Grandpa Simpson. Grandpa is a storyteller. The show constructed his characterization around a specific approach to personal history that prioritizes the dramatic, the emotionally resonant, and the needs of the present moment over strict fidelity to what actually happened. He is not a liar, exactly. The events he describes almost certainly occurred in some form. But he is a performer, and performers shape their material, and the material Grandpa has been shaping for 60 years is the story of the most significant period of his life, told to whoever would stand still long enough to listen. His primary audience has been Homer, and Homer, as the show has established with quiet consistency across decades, does not listen. This is one of the show's most persistently observed but least commented upon dynamics. Homer loves his father in the way that adult children love parents they feel guilty about, with genuine warmth held at a careful distance, with the specific quality of affection that wants the other person well without wanting to know them fully. He sits through Grandpa's stories. He endures them. He waits for them to end. He has been in the same room with Grandpa's wartime accounts for 40 years and retained almost nothing, which means he has never been in a position to compare one version against another, to notice where the details shift, to ask the obvious question. The obvious question being, which version is true? Without anyone asking, the versions have been accumulating across 36 seasons, each new episode adding another layer to a record that contradicts itself in ways that the only person who might catch the contradictions has never been paying careful enough attention to register. What has the story been drifting toward? This is where the analysis requires care, because the show has not stated the answer directly, and the available evidence is partial and scattered across dozens of episodes. But there is a quality to the Grandpa episodes that go deepest into his actual wartime experience, not the comedic references, not the background mentions, but the episodes that seem to want to genuinely engage with who he was during the war that is worth attending to. These episodes, across different seasons, share a quality of moral ambiguity in the background of the heroic veteran narrative that Grandpa presents as foreground, not grand, dramatic moral compromises. Small ones. Moments where the thing he did was expedient rather than principled. Moments where the shape of his presence in a particular situation suggests that his priorities were not always what the official version of himself implies. Moments where he stops mid-story when the memory reaches a specific point, and the stopping has the quality of not wanting to continue rather than forgetting. He mentions things in passing that complicate the picture, stories about comrades that end too quickly, with the natural conclusion omitted. Opinions about survival and its distribution, expressed with a weight that implies personal knowledge of why some men came home and others did not. References to specific decisions made in specific moments that, listened to carefully, carry a different valence than the surrounding narrative. The show does not develop this. Grandpa's wartime experience is backstory, not story context for the man he became rather than the subject of sustained examination. What the show is actually interested in is the consequence of whatever happened during the war, the distant father he became, the specific failure of emotional availability that shaped Homer, the deal he eventually made with Burns, the decades of buried truth about Mona Simpson that he kept from his son. All of those consequences trace backward to the war, to something that happened there, or to the person the war revealed Grandpa to be, or to some combination of revelation and circumstance that determined the kind of father he would become. He has been telling the story of that time for 60 years. Every version is slightly different. Every version presents a grandpa who was heroic, or at minimum competent, who was on the right side of history, who survived because he deserved to survive. Every version maintains the veteran identity that is the foundation of whatever authority he carries in the show's world, the right to be listened to, the claim to have mattered once in a way that the subsequent decades of institutional living have not diminished. He needs the story to be a certain way. And because Homer has never listened carefully enough to hold him to a consistent version, the story has been free to drift toward the version he needs. This is what human beings do with difficult personal histories. They revise. They select. They shape the telling until it is bearable. The details that complicate the central narrative get quietly omitted. The incidents that show the teller in the worst possible light get softened or transposed or simply absorbed into the surrounding silence. The sequence of events gets reordered until the shape that emerges is something that can be carried forward rather than something that has to be faced directly every time it is recalled. And they do this especially with their children, with the people who need to believe a particular version of who their parent is, because the relationship depends on that version, because too much truth would require dismantling something that both people need. Grandpa cannot tell Homer the full unrevised version of what happened during the war. Not because Homer would judge him harshly. Homer's capacity for sustained judgment is limited, and his love for his father is real and not conditional on Grandpa's heroism. But because the full version would require Grandpa to say things he has not said in 60 years, things that have calcified inside the silence until removing them would mean dismantling structures that the silence has been building over decades. The silence has been building for a long time. Since before Homer was born, probably. Since whatever happened in the war that Grandpa has spent the intervening years constructing a better version of. And Homer, who never listened carefully enough to make honesty necessary, has been the perfect audience for the performance, present enough to seem engaged, inattentive enough to never require accuracy. The mystery at number 7 is not what specifically happened during the war. The show does not tell us, and probably never will. The specific event matters less than what the event represents. The gap between a father and a son that has been filled, on the father's side, with 60 years of carefully managed storytelling, and on the son's side, with decades of not listening that has kept the gap from closing or being acknowledged. Homer does not know his father. He has spent his entire adult life in proximity to a man he does not know, receiving stories that shift just enough to prevent full understanding but not so much that anyone notices the shifting. And the war is the place where the not knowing started, where something happened that determined who Grandpa would become. And the man Grandpa became raised Homer to be exactly the kind of son who would never ask the question that would require the real answer. The show built this in the background of a comedy about an old man who tells rambling stories, and almost nobody noticed. Section 7, ranked number 6, Burns and Smithers. The century of devotion, the managed feelings, and the question that has never been answered. Rank, number 6. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 7 out of 10. Hidden behind comedy and behind the show's extraordinarily careful management of its most emotionally complex, ongoing relationship, the show acknowledged the love and kept the question of what Burns feels sealed behind the same ambiguity it has maintained since the beginning. Waylon Smithers is in love with Charles Montgomery Burns. This is no longer a mystery. The show has addressed it. By the later seasons, Smithers's feelings are canonical. His emotional situation has been navigated with a care the show does not always bring to its sensitive material, and the audience has been given a reasonably complete picture of what devotion that deep looks like when sustained across decades without full reciprocation. The love is settled. The show confirmed it. We can set it aside and look at the harder question. What does Burns feel? This is the question the show has been managing for 36 years, with a precision that suggests intentional ambiguity rather than narrative oversight. Burns's interiority when it comes to Smithers has been kept deliberately out of reach. His behavior towards Smithers is a performance that contains within it something that might be feeling, surfacing in isolated moments, retreating before it can be examined, leaving traces that accumulate across decades without ever resolving into a clear statement. Let us establish what we know from canon before attempting interpretation. Smithers is not merely Burns's personal assistant in the way that implies a conventional employment relationship. He is the architecture of Burns's continued existence. The Springfield Files episode establishes with clarity that Burns's weekly medical treatment schedule is what keeps him alive. The treatments must happen on a precise schedule. Miss one and the disease equilibrium that sustains him collapses, and Burns dies within days. Smithers manages this schedule. He manages it with the vigilance of someone who understands that the logistical failure is a death sentence not for himself, but for the man he has organized his life around. Burns knows this. Burns is, whatever his eccentricities and his theatrical cruelty, one of the most strategically capable intelligences in Springfield's world. He has been managing his own survival as an engineering project for over a century. He knows which components of his life support structure are critical and which are redundant. Smithers is critical. Burns knows it. And yet the relationship Burns maintains with Smithers involves, consistently and across the entire show's run, a treatment that would strain any ordinary employment relationship past its breaking point. He forgets Smithers's first name not occasionally, as a memory lapse, but with a regularity that reads as choice rather than aging. He fires him when the plot of an episode provides occasion for it, and rehires him when the episode's logic requires his return, without ever acknowledging the firing as the act of cruelty it represents. He dismisses Smithers's feelings when they become visible, not with the kind of careful management that a person who cares would employ, but with the casual deflection of someone who finds the visibility inconvenient. He has done things to Smithers across dozens of episodes across 3 decades that would end almost any other relationship between two people, and Smithers absorbs each one and returns. This pattern is the foundation of the mystery. It is consistent enough, across enough episodes over enough years, to be a characterization rather than the accumulation of separate episodic choices. Burns treats Smithers with a specific blend of dependency and cruelty that has the regularity of a deliberate approach rather than the randomness of thoughtlessness. Why? The first available interpretation is the most charitable and may also be the most accurate. Burns is genuinely incapable of emotional reciprocity in the way that Smithers's devotion requires. He has been alive for over a century. He has outlived the entire social world of his formative years, every friend, every colleague, every person who knew him before the power and the wealth and the century of isolation built the specific version of himself that Springfield now contains. Whatever capacity he had for genuine connection, for the vulnerability that reciprocal relationships require, may have been gradually replaced by the habits of self-sufficiency that extreme longevity and extreme power produce together. He does not treat Smithers cruelly because he has calculated that cruelty serves him. He treats Smithers the way he treats most things, with the casual indifference of someone who has stopped experiencing the world as fully real, who has long since passed the threshold at which other people's inner lives register as mattering. What looks like specific, directed cruelty towards Smithers is, on this reading, just the ordinary operation of a character who has been isolated from genuine human contact for so long that the isolation has become structural rather than circumstantial. This reading has support. The show's depiction of Burns's loneliness, real, quiet, surfacing in unguarded moments before being covered again by the comedy, or by Burns's own self-management, suggests a person genuinely isolated rather than strategically cold. The loneliness is not performed. It surfaces when the scene structure is not organizing around Burns being menacing or contemptuous, when he is simply present in a space and allowed to exist without performing his dominant register. And in those moments, what is visible is not a man who chose isolation. It is a man who has been alone long enough that he may not fully remember what the alternative felt like. The second interpretation is less charitable and more structurally consistent with Burns's general character. He feels something towards Smithers and has made a calculation that acknowledging it would change the relationship in ways that do not serve him. The relationship as it currently exists is entirely favorable to Burns. He receives total logistical management, unconditional loyalty, and the kind of devotion that keeps him alive and functioning without requiring him to offer anything beyond continued employment, and the occasional moment of warmth calibrated to just below the level of genuine acknowledgement. If he acknowledged Smithers' feelings, if he expressed reciprocation of any kind that Smithers could clearly receive, the dynamic would shift. Smithers would gain leverage he currently does not have. The implicit terms of their arrangement would require renegotiation on terms Burns cannot fully control. A man of Burns's intelligence, who has spent over a century approaching every significant relationship in his life as a strategic problem to be optimized, would see this calculation clearly and would make it automatically, without the kind of explicit deliberation that we might imagine preceding a major relationship decision. It would not be a conscious choice to be cruel. It would be the default operation of an intelligence that has learned to manage everything, including personal relationships, through the framework of strategic advantage. The third interpretation is the one the show has most carefully avoided committing to. Burns feels something genuine towards Smithers and does not recognize it as such, because he has not had enough experience of genuine, unstrategic feeling to have a framework for identifying it when it arises. He knows desire. He knows the desire for power, for continuation, for the various appetites that have organized his life. He knows the specific satisfaction of getting what he wants and the specific frustration of being denied it. He knows anger and contempt and the particular pleasure of watching a scheme succeed. He knows all of these things fluently, in the way that someone who has spent a century experiencing them would know them. But the feeling that attaches to a specific person's presence, the feeling that is distinct from utility, distinct from strategic value, distinct from any calculation of what this person provides versus what they cost that feeling, which has a different quality from all the other feelings, may simply not be recognizable to Burns. He may not have a category for it. He may have never needed one. The show has caught his face in specific moments, isolated instances across the full run of the show, not a pattern sustained enough to be definitive, but present enough to be noted where something is registering that does not fit the familiar Burns registers. The quality of attention he brings to certain scenes where Smithers is speaking directly to him, the specific look when Smithers returns after an absence, which is not the look of relief at a functional system being restored, but something quieter, more personal. The occasional line that, if said by anyone else in any other context, would be unmistakably tender, and that Burns seems to deliver without noticing what he is delivering. The show catches these moments and does not develop them. It surfaces them and then steps past them, because developing them would require committing to a reading of Burns's interiority that the show has never been willing to commit to. And so the mystery remains. What does Burns feel, and does he know it? And if he knows it, what has he been doing with the knowledge across a century of being attended to by the one person in Springfield who has chosen to stay? The deepest layer of this mystery is not about feelings. It is about what a century of power does to a person's capacity to receive what is being freely given. Smithers gives Burns everything. Not because he must, there is no structural compulsion keeping him there. No threat that would materialize if he left. No cage beyond the one his own choices have built. He stays because he chooses to stay. His devotion is voluntary, which makes it the rarest thing Burns has encountered in a long life, defined by the exercise of power that makes most relationships transactional. And Burns, who has spent that long life building systems specifically to ensure that people give him what he needs whether they want to or not, may have simply never developed the equipment to recognize the value of something given freely. He has everything from Smithers. Everything, freely given, maintained across decades without condition. And the question the show has never answered, the question at the center of the mystery at number 6, is whether Burns has any idea what that is worth. Section 8 ranked number 5. The Lisa and Burns parallel, the girl who can see the whole picture, and the show that will not let her assemble it. Rank number 5. How badly the show wanted you to miss it, 8 out of 10. The show hid this one inside Lisa's established role as the family's moral crusader, a characterization so consistent and so familiar that the specific, strange, charged nature of her recurring encounters with Burns was absorbed into the general pattern and never examined separately. Lisa Simpson has engaged with Charles Montgomery Burns more meaningfully and more directly than any other member of her family. Let's be precise about what this claim requires. Homer has worked for Burns for decades. He has spent more time in the same building as Burns than any other character, drawn wages from Burns's payroll, existed in professional proximity to the man for his entire adult life. The relationship is the longest by any measure of simple duration or sustained contact. But proximity is not engagement, and Homer and Burns have never genuinely engaged. Burns cannot remember Homer's name, despite the employment relationship spanning 30-plus years. This is played as a recurring joke, the great man who cannot be bothered to learn the name of the man who operates his reactor, but it says something specific about what Burns has decided to see when he looks at Homer. Homer is not a person to Burns, he is a position. Safety Inspector, Sector 7G, a point in an org chart that can be populated by whoever the system produces. That Homer has a name, a history, a family, a specific quality of suffering that Burns is directly responsible for, none of this registers, because Burns's perceptual apparatus has not been calibrated to register it. Homer, for his part, cannot connect Burns, the employer, to Burns, the cause of his family's devastation, even though he has been given, across multiple episodes, most of the pieces of that connection. His mother's story involves Burns directly. The deal his father made involved Burns. The contamination in the water that has been degrading his cognition for decades comes from Burns's plant. The man who signs his paychecks is the man who destroyed his family across 3 generations. Homer cannot see this. The cognitive fog that Burns's plant helped produce prevents exactly the kind of sustained analytical connection that would be required to see it. 2 people in the same building for 3 decades, neither of them actually seeing the other. Lisa sees Burns, not the category of him, the villain, the billionaire, the caricature of unchecked capital, the cartoon rich man whose villainy provides reliable comedic material. She sees the structure he represents and the decisions he made and the specific architecture of how Springfield came to be what it is, and she traces it back to him with the analytical precision of someone whose critical faculties have not been compromised in the way that most of Springfield's residents have. In episode after episode, across the show's entire run, when Lisa investigates environmental contamination and traces it to its source, she does not simply find the plant, she finds Burns. The man behind the plant, the decision-making intelligence that determined the plant's violations would continue, the strategic actor who assessed the cost of compliance against the cost of non-compliance and chose non-compliance because the population downstream was too impaired to effectively demand otherwise. She sees this. She has seen it in various forms for 36 years. And Burns, whose business across the same 36 years has been managing what the people around him are able to see, responds to Lisa differently than he responds to everyone else. He fights her, actively, strategically, with a seriousness that he brings to almost none of his other antagonists. Burns routinely dismisses threats from people with significantly more institutional power than Lisa possesses. He manipulates regulatory agencies. He ignores safety inspectors. He buys political cover. He treats the official mechanisms of accountability with the contempt of someone who has been navigating around them for a century. But he fights Lisa. He works against her directly. He does not dismiss her. This is, for Burns, a form of respect, the highest form he knows how to express, which is the form that takes the other person seriously enough to actually oppose them rather than simply routing around them. In episodes where Burns and Lisa share space built around something other than direct opposition, where the plot places them as temporary allies, or in proximity with a shared circumstance, or simply in the same room with time to attend to each other, The show depicts Burns with a quality of genuine attention that is almost completely absent from his scenes with anyone else. He is present in these scenes in a way he is not usually present. He attends. He responds to what Lisa is actually saying rather than to what he expected her to say. Something is being exchanged in these moments. The show catches it. The show does not develop it. The show allows it to exist briefly and then covers it before anyone has a chance to examine it. Why does Burns respond to Lisa this way? The surface answer: he respects intelligence. Burns is capable of recognizing exceptional minds. He is, for all his villainy, not stupid, and he encounters genuine intelligence rarely in Springfield. Lisa represents something he almost never sees: a mind operating in the full use of its capacities, unimpaired, undimmed, applying critical analytical tools to the available evidence without the cognitive fog that Springfield's contamination has produced in most of the town's population. He knows what that looks like because he experiences it himself. Burns is old and damaged in his own specific ways, but his intelligence has not been compromised the way his workers have. He can recognize his own kind. And in Springfield, Lisa is the closest thing to his own kind that he has encountered in decades. The deeper answer, the one the show has been placing in front of you without quite stating. Burns responds to Lisa the way he does because she is the only person in Springfield who can actually see him as a structure rather than as a character. The population of Springfield looks at Burns and sees the familiar categories: boss, villain, scary old man, eccentric billionaire. These categories are not wrong. They are just incomplete. They describe Burns's surface manifestation without engaging with the system he represents. Lisa looks at the system. She traces the contamination to the plant, and the plant to Burns, and the Burns decisions to their consequences across the town and across 3 generations of the Simpson family. She is not just seeing Burns the person. She is seeing Burns the architecture, the deliberate choices made across decades that produce the Springfield that exists now. And Burns, who built that architecture with full awareness of what he was building, who understood exactly what the plant would do to the population downstream, because he was managing the same radiation exposure in his own body and watching its effects on his own biology. Burns finds Lisa threatening not because she is smart, but because she is close. She is assembling the picture. She is getting near to the full account of what he has done, and the show keeps her just short of it. Because the full picture, assembled and held and articulated by someone with Lisa's moral clarity and communicative capacity, would be the end of Springfield's equilibrium. It would be the document that changes everything. It would be the moment when someone finally says, clearly and completely, and with the evidence assembled in proper order, exactly what has been done to this town and by whom. The show cannot allow this. If Lisa finishes the puzzle, the show is over, so it keeps her near. It gives her pieces. It places her in proximity to the full account, in episode after episode, and then redirects her just before she arrives. The plot resolves without the full connection being made. The episode ends and she is 8 years old again, with the picture in fragments, waiting for the next piece to arrive without having been given the frame that would show her where it goes. Burns watches this. He is aware of how close she comes, and in that awareness and the specific quality of attention he brings to the episodes where she is nearest to the full account is something that might be fear, or might be respect, or might be the specific feeling that only a person who built something can have toward the person who is closest to fully understanding what was built. The show has never named it. The show has kept it in the background of these scenes, surfacing briefly, retreating before it can be pinned. But it is there. Across 36 years, across every episode where they encounter each other. A man who built a system and a girl who is close to seeing the whole of it, with something unnamed passing between them in every scene they share. The show wanted you to see Lisa and Burns as hero and villain. The familiar categories, the legible moral framework, the uncomplicated reading that lets you enjoy the episodes without being troubled by the stranger thing underneath. The stranger thing is there. It has been there since the beginning. Lisa almost sees it every time. Section 9, ranked number 4. The Marge Simpson identity question. Who she was before, who she became, and the space between those two people that the show has never fully crossed. Rank number 4. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 8 out of 10. Hidden inside Marge's function as the emotional anchor of the family, so thoroughly positioned as the person observing and managing other characters' crises that her own deepest question was rendered nearly invisible by the role. Marge Simpson is the most under-examined person in her own family. This sounds wrong at first. The show has produced Marge-centric episodes across 36 seasons. She has been given storylines about her unrealized ambitions, her suppressed emotions, her professional capabilities, her relationship with her past. The show has not ignored her. There are episodes, genuinely good ones, built entirely around Marge's inner life, and some of them are among the series' better efforts at emotional honesty. But examined carefully, across the full length of the show's run, Marge has been consistently positioned as the person who observes and responds to the family's dramas rather than the subject of the family's sustained attention. She is the anchor. She is the constant. She is the reason the household functions when Homer's latest catastrophe is unfolding, or Bart's school situation is escalating, or Lisa's idealism has produced a new campaign that will require significant emotional management. She holds everything together. And the fundamental question at the center of her character, the gap between who she was before the family and who she has become within it, has been approached dozens of times across the show's run without ever being fully crossed. Let's build this carefully, starting with what we can establish about Marge before Homer. Marge Bouvier grew up in a household that the show depicts in fragments across its flashback episodes. Her mother, Jacqueline's social ambitions, her sisters, Patty and Selma, who became their own specific kinds of people, not warmer exactly, but more independent, in possession of lives that were organized around their own priorities, rather than anyone else's needs. The household had a specific quality that the show implies without detailing. It was not a house where Marge's particular qualities were easily recognized or valued. In the flashback episodes that return to her adolescence, Marge is depicted as engaged and curious, the kind of student who raised her hand, who had opinions and was not afraid to offer them, who approached ideas with a genuine interest that distinguishes her from both her sisters and from most of the Springfield norm. She was smart. She was interested in things. She had the specific quality of attention that, in a different environment with different resources, might have been developed into something substantial. She met Homer in high school. The show has returned to their origin story enough times, retelling it in different versions as the floating timeline dragged their formative years from the 1970s forward through successive decades, that the constants of the story are clear, even though the period details keep changing. Homer pursued her with sincerity. He noticed things about her that other people in her life missed. He showed up repeatedly and with a commitment that eventually broke through her practical reservations, and the love she developed for him was real, fully, genuinely real in the way that the show's best emotional content is always real. She chose him, with full awareness of what she was choosing. Marge is not naive. She has never been naive. She knew when she chose Homer something of what the life ahead would require of her. She chose it anyway because the love was real, and because some choices are made with full knowledge of what they cost. The life she built produced 3 children, a house, a marriage that has survived things that would end most marriages, and a version of herself that is, by any fair measure, genuinely extraordinary. Managing the Simpson household requires more cognitive and emotional capacity than the comedy usually acknowledges. Homer's cognitive limitations and emotional volatility are not small challenges. They require constant low-level navigation, the kind of management that is nearly invisible because it is performed so smoothly that it appears effortless. Lisa's emotional complexity and intellectual intensity require a particular kind of attentiveness. She needs to be understood by someone, and Marge is the person in the household best equipped to understand her, and the effort of that understanding is real even when it looks like ordinary parental warmth. Bart's specific configuration of intelligence and self-sabotage and wounded pride requires a patience calibrated so precisely that too much of it would enable him, and too little would break. Something that the show suggests is still salvageable. Marge does all of this. She does it every day. She does it across 36 years without the kind of institutional support, professional recognition, financial independence, a community that fully sees what she is doing and what it requires that would make it sustainable by ordinary human standards. And she does it. The show consistently suggests, because the family is genuinely worth it. The love she has for Homer and her children is not a performance or a cope. It is the real organizing principle of her life, and the life built around it has genuine value. All of that is true, and it coexists with the thing the show has been carefully not saying. The thing the show has been carefully not saying is, what did Marge close off? Not what did she give up. That question is answerable, and the show has answered it across the gambling episodes and the painting episodes and the various professional detours that periodically surface and then are redirected back toward home. She gave up at various points professional paths that might have gone somewhere. She gave up the specific kind of freedom that comes from economic independence. She gave up the room to be fully herself in the ways that being fully yourself requires resources and space that the Simpson household has rarely provided. Those are things she gave up. They are real. The show acknowledges them. What it does not acknowledge, what it has been avoiding for 36 years, with a care that suggests it knows exactly where the question leads, is what she closed off internally. What she learned, gradually and without quite deciding to stop wanting. Because wanting things you cannot have in a life configured around someone else's needs is unsustainable. And Marge is, above all else, someone who sustains things. Someone who makes the household work, who keeps the family intact, who absorbs the chaos and produces stability. To sustain all of that across decades, you have to manage your own wanting very carefully. You have to close off the wanting that destabilizes what you are sustaining. And Marge has. The evidence is not dramatic. It is the accumulation of small moments, the quiet surface of episodes that are primarily about other things, where the camera catches Marge in a pause between tasks and finds something there that the show immediately covers. Not unhappiness exactly, not regret in the identifiable sense, something more subtle. The look of a person who is fully present in the life they are living and simultaneously aware, in some peripheral way, of the life they are not living. The gambling storyline is the most direct expression of this in the show, and it is worth examining carefully because the show handled it with more psychological specificity than it usually brings to Marge-centric storylines. Marge is good at gambling. When she discovers this, the show depicts her pleasure in the discovery, with a precision that distinguishes it from the ordinary pleasure of a new activity. She is not just having fun, she is in control of something. She is in an environment that responds to her intelligence and her nerve in ways that her ordinary life does not. The casino does not know her as Homer's wife or as Bart's mother or as the woman who manages the household at 742 Evergreen Terrace. It knows her as a player, and it responds to her as such with the impersonal, democratic fairness of an institution that does not care about your history or your relationships or your role, only about the decisions you make in front of it. In the casino, Marge makes decisions that matter, and the consequences are clear and immediate, and hers. Not consequences she is managing for someone else. Consequences of her own choices, experienced in her own person. This is not a small thing. This is a very specific kind of hunger being fed for the first time in a very long time, possibly for the first time since the life was configured around Homer and the family. The show understands this. The episode is not really about gambling as a destructive behavior. It is about a highly capable person in a life that does not fully use her capability, finding an environment that does, and not being able to stop going back. She gives it up because the family needs her to. She returns. She makes the choice to return because the family is the real thing, and the casino was a substitute for something she cannot quite name or access. But the hunger that the casino fed, the hunger for control, for consequences that are hers, for an environment that responds to her as a full person rather than as the person who manages the family, that hunger does not disappear when she stops going to the casino. It goes back into the place where she keeps the other things she has learned to not want. The painting episodes carry the same signal. When Marge discovers an artistic gift and produces work that gets recognition from people qualified to evaluate it, the show depicts her satisfaction in that recognition, with a care that says something real about what kind of recognition she has been living without. It is not just pride in a new skill. It is the specific experience of being seen, of having something you made encountered by someone who can perceive its actual quality rather than simply the effort behind it. In her ordinary life, Marge is appreciated. This is important. It is not a marriage without appreciation. Homer loves her. The children need her. The household acknowledges, in its way, what she provides. But being needed is not the same as being seen. Being appreciated for what you do is not the same as being recognized for what you are. And Marge, who is more than the function she serves in the household, has been living primarily within the function for long enough that the recognition, when it comes from an outside source, carries the specific emotional charge of something that has been withheld for a long time. The show handles both of these episodes with unusual honesty. And then both episodes end and Marge returns and the household resumes its configuration. And the question the show has never answered the question, at the center of the mystery at number 4 is this: does Marge know? Does she carry the full picture of both versions of herself, the one she is and the one she might have been with clarity? And does she look at both versions simultaneously and make peace with the choice? Or is the choice something she keeps at a slight remove, not quite fully examined, because fully examining it would require sitting with something too heavy to hold alongside everything else she is already holding? The show has approached this question and stepped back from the edge each time. In episodes that come closest to committing to an answer that build their entire arc around Marge's perspective, around her inner life, around the question of what she wants and whether she is getting it, the resolution comes before the answer becomes clear. The episode ends at the moment when the question is at its most pointed, and the next episode begins, and Marge is back in the house, managing everything, warm and capable, and slightly mysterious in the way she has always been. There is one more dimension to this that requires attention. The show's floating timeline means that Marge and Homer's origin story has been retold multiple times, in different periods, as the character's youth was dragged forward across the decades. They met in the 1970s, then the 1980s, then the 1990s, then the 2000s. The specific era shifts, the cultural details change, but the core story remains. In every version, the story of how Marge chose Homer is told as a love story, which it genuinely is. But across the versions, there is something consistent that the show never draws attention to. In every version of Marge's origin story, she is in a context where her options are limited, not criminally, not dramatically, but in the way that young women's options have been limited across various eras, by the specific combination of family expectation and social context, and the narrowed range of what a girl like Marge, from a family like the Bouviers, in a town like the one the flashbacks imply, might realistically pursue. In every version, Homer is the most interesting thing available to her, the most interesting person who showed up and was actually interested in her in return, the most vivid choice in a limited field. This is not an indictment of Homer. The love is real, but it means that the story of Marge choosing Homer is also the story of Marge choosing within a set of constraints that the show has never fully mapped. The freedom of the choice is real, but it is the freedom available within a particular context, and the context has never been examined alongside the choice. The show loves Marge. It has loved her for 36 years, and it has protected the love story from the full weight of this examination by keeping the warmth between Homer and Marge genuinely warm and genuinely earned and genuinely real. You believe the love because the show has worked to make you believe it. But underneath the love, and alongside it, and in the quiet moments between the tasks, is the woman who was Marge Bouvier before she was Marge Simpson. The one who raised her hand. The one who had opinions. The one who can paint with skill that surprises specialists and play cards with a competence that surprises a casino and manage a household crisis with the calm precision of someone operating well within their capacity. That person is still there. She surfaces in the gaps. She looks out of those flat effect moments that the show catches and immediately covers. The show will not say what she is thinking in those moments. It is afraid of what the answer would cost. Section 10. Ranked number 3. Springfield Elementary, and the machine that keeps building the population the power plant needs. Rank. Number 3. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 9 out of 10. Hidden inside 36 years of underfunded school comedy that was so effectively and consistently funny that the structural pattern underneath it was never separated from the comedy premise that housed it. Springfield Elementary School has been failing its students since the first episode of the show. This is so thoroughly established, so completely integrated into the show's basic premise, so reliably present in any episode set at the school, that it has its own genre within the series. The burnt-out teachers, the cafeteria food of uncertain composition, the principal who is not who he claims to be, the gym teacher who treats children with a casual contempt that in any functional institutional context would be actionable, the school counselor whose advice is so detached from the actual situations he encounters that it functions as a kind of organized indifference. These elements are foundational comedy premises. They have been funny for 36 years. The reliability of the humor is itself part of the point. You know what to expect when the show visits the school, and the expectation is always met, and the meeting is always funny. And the reliability is exactly what has prevented most people from examining what is underneath the comedy. Because the school's failure has a shape. It is not random failure, not the failure of underfunding alone, not the failure of individual teacher burnout, not the ordinary institutional entropy that affects all bureaucracies as they age. The failure is specific, calibrated, consistent in ways that accident cannot entirely explain. The school consistently produces graduates who are functional enough to operate the power plant and other Springfield institutions, and consistently fails to develop the kind of intellectual capability that would allow those graduates to critically examine the circumstances of their employment or organize effectively around their collective interests. Let's map this carefully, starting with the show's two most documented examples. Lisa Simpson has been in the third grade since 1989. Her IQ, described across various episodes as extraordinary, and in at least one depiction as impossible to measure on standard instruments, places her in a category that should, in any educational system oriented around developing human potential, trigger immediate and comprehensive response. External observers who encounter her work are consistently surprised. Specialists in various fields who interact with her ability respond with the recognition of people meeting something genuinely exceptional. She has been identified, across multiple episodes, as a student whose needs cannot be met within the standard Springfield elementary curriculum. She is still in the third grade. The individual episodes that depict the school encountering Lisa's exceptionalism follow a consistent pattern. The encounter is acknowledged, a response is briefly considered, and then the episode's logic returns Lisa to the ordinary structure. The acknowledgement never converts into sustained institutional change. The consideration never produces a policy. The response is always temporary, always framed as special rather than structural, always oriented around managing Lisa's exceptionalism within the existing framework, rather than adapting the framework to accommodate it. This is not incompetence. Incompetence is random. This pattern is consistent across 36 years and multiple administrations of the school. Every time the school has an opportunity to do something different for Lisa to adapt, to expand, to create the educational context that her capability requires, it finds a reason not to. The reason is never stated. The show does not stage a scene where someone in the Springfield Elementary administration says explicitly that they have decided to suppress Lisa's development. It does not need to. The pattern is visible without the explicit statement. The pattern is the statement. Now look at Bart. Bart Simpson is not unintelligent. The show has established this across many episodes, across many different approaches to the question. When he is genuinely engaged, when the material activates his specific mode of intelligence, when the problem requires the lateral thinking and social sophistication that are his natural capacities, when the stakes feel real rather than institutional, he performs at a level that surprises the adults around him. He is creative. He is perceptive in specific ways. He reads situations with a speed and accuracy that his academic record completely fails to capture. His academic record is catastrophic. Not because he is not applying himself, though the school would frame it that way. Because the school's definition of application of what engagement with learning looks like, of what intelligence looks like, of what the successful student produces is calibrated to exclude exactly the kind of intelligence Bart has. The school rewards particular forms of compliance, particular modes of demonstrating knowledge, particular ways of sitting in a desk and producing answers in the format that the institution has decided constitutes learning. Bart's capacities do not express themselves in those forms. The school therefore records him as deficient, and the methods the school employs to address the recorded deficiency are not methods likely to produce improvement. They are methods likely to confirm the diagnosis. detention for the behavioral expressions of an intelligence that has not been given legitimate channels, remedial tracks that remove him from even the modest intellectual stimulation the regular curriculum provides, a consistent institutional message, delivered through grades and disciplinary actions and the specific quality of the attention his teachers bring to him, that his particular way of engaging with the world is wrong, and that the right response to his wrongness is management rather than development. The show has depicted this so consistently across so many episodes that it has become background noise, the Bart at school dynamic, as expected, and as reliably present as the Homer at work dynamic, normalized into furniture. But the furniture is built in a specific shape. The shape it builds toward the adult that Bart is being constructed into by this educational experience is the adult that Springfield's economy requires. Someone who has been told consistently that his intelligence is not real intelligence. Someone who has learned that institutional authority is arbitrary rather than legitimate, which produces either compliant cynicism or an anti-authoritarianism that the institution can continue to manage. Someone who arrives at adulthood without the academic credentials that would provide exit options from the Springfield labor market. This is what the school produces from Bart. And between Lisa's suppressed exceptionalism and Bart's manufactured inadequacy, the school is also producing the bulk of its population. The students in the middle of the distribution who get just enough instruction to be functional workers and not enough to be dangerous thinkers. Students who graduate knowing how to operate machinery and follow instructions, and exist within the hierarchy of a large employer without asking questions that the hierarchy is not prepared to answer. The school is not accidentally producing this distribution. The school is producing it because its institutional logic, its resource allocations, its curricular priorities, its disciplinary frameworks, its responses to outliers at both ends of the academic spectrum systematically favors this distribution of outcomes. Where does this institutional logic come from? Consider the context. Springfield Elementary exists within an economy organized primarily around the nuclear power plant. The plant is the primary employer. The plant requires workers with specific characteristics: functional enough to operate the equipment safely, more or less, compliant enough to accept the conditions without organizing against them, not analytically capable enough to understand what the equipment is doing to them or why the conditions are what they are. Burns has demonstrated, across multiple episodes, that he understands this requirement precisely. His retention of Homer as safety inspector, despite Homer's catastrophic incompetence, is not negligence, it is strategy. The German investors who bought the plant briefly fired Homer, recognized the cost of genuine safety compliance, and nearly went bankrupt from the realization. Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer because Homer as safety inspector is the system working exactly as Burns needs it to work. The same logic applies to the workforce more broadly. A workforce that has been processed by Springfield Elementary, that has been told for 12 years that their intelligence takes specific forms and that the forms it naturally takes in them are deficient, is a workforce that arrives at the plant gate already shaped for the job Burns needs. Done. Burns did not design Springfield Elementary. He has not, in any depicted episode, been shown to be in direct control of its curriculum or its disciplinary policies or its resource allocations. The connection is structural rather than conspiratorial. The school exists in an economy Burns controls. The economy's requirements shape what the school needs to produce. The school produces it, and the loop closes. No meeting was required. No explicit decision was necessary. The incentive structure of the school, the way its success is measured, the way its resources are allocated, the way its staff is evaluated is organized around producing the graduates that the town's dominant employer requires. And the town's dominant employer requires exactly what the school consistently produces. There is one figure who has been at the center of this institutional logic for most of the show's run, and who deserves more careful attention than the show has given her. Edna Krabappel taught Bart Simpson. She was one of the show's most humanized secondary characters, funny in a specific world-weary way, occasionally genuinely warm, depicted in the episodes that engaged with her seriously as a person with a real inner life and real disappointments and real moments of grace. The show loved her enough that when the actress who voiced her Marcia Wallace, died in 2013, the show acknowledged the death with genuine care rather than simply recasting or ignoring it. But Edna Krabappel taught Bart Simpson for years, and she taught him the way that records him as failing, that responds to his behavioral expressions of boredom and frustration with punishment rather than engagement, that processes him through the institutional logic of Springfield Elementary without ever seriously attempting to adapt that logic to what he actually is. And the show has depicted, in small moments across the episodes that focus on Krabappel most seriously, that she knows what she is doing, not that she is happy about it, not that she is comfortable with it, but that she has made a specific accommodation, the accommodation that institutions require of their long-tenured employees who have passed the point where idealism is sustainable, with the gap between what education could be for a student like Bart and what Springfield Elementary does with a student like Bart. She is not a villain. She is a person doing her job within a system she did not design and cannot fundamentally change. The system's requirements are what they are. Her compliance with those requirements is what keeps her employed, what keeps her in the classroom, what keeps her in proximity to the occasional student she can actually reach, even within the system's constraints. And Bart is not one of those students. Not within the system's terms. The system has no framework for what Bart actually is, and Krabappel, who has learned to operate within the system's terms because the alternative is burning herself out against a wall that does not move, has made peace with the absence of that framework. She sees him. The show has caught this. A look, occasionally, between teacher and student in which what is actually there the real Bart, the intelligent, perceptive, capable, difficult, creative, real child, is briefly visible to the person who is supposed to be educating him. And then the system's demands reassert themselves, and the look closes. That look is the most honest thing Springfield Elementary has ever produced, and neither of them can do anything with it. The mystery at number 3 is this. The school is not failing. It is succeeding. It is producing exactly the outcomes that the structure of Springfield's economy requires, through institutional logic that does not require explicit direction or central conspiracy, simply through the accumulated effect of incentive structures organized around the needs of the dominant employer. The comedy of the underfunded school has been covering this for 36 years, making you laugh at Principal Skinner's cowardice and the cafeteria's mysterious meat and the gym teacher's mustache, keeping you in the comedy register, keeping you from sitting with the structural reading long enough for it to become uncomfortable. But the reading is there. It has been there since the first episode. It will be there in the last one. The machine keeps running. Lisa keeps raising her hand. Bart keeps failing classes that were never designed for him to pass. And Springfield Elementary keeps producing the next generation of people who will live in Springfield without quite understanding why, and work at the plant without quite understanding what it is doing to them, and vote for Quimby without quite understanding why he always wins, and shop at the Quickie Mart and drink at Moe's, and watch the couch gag and settle in on Sunday night to see what the family is up to this week, exactly as designed. Section 11, ranked number 2, Homer and Marge's marriage. The love that is real and everything it is entangled with, and the question the show has spent 36 years carefully not answering. Rank. Number 2. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. 9 out of 10. The show hid this one inside the love story itself, made it warm enough, earned enough, real enough, that examining it too closely felt like a betrayal of the thing you were already loving. That is the most sophisticated concealment in this entire ranking. Homer and Marge Simpson have been married for the entirety of the show's run and for some time before it began. Their marriage is one of the foundational emotional facts of the series, not just one of its storylines, not just one element among many, but the structural center around which the show's emotional life is organized. Without the marriage, the family does not exist in the form we know it. Without the family in this specific form, the show is not the show it has been for 36 years. Homer and Marge are not just characters who happen to be married, they are the marriage. The show was built around it. And the show has developed it, across hundreds of episodes and 3 decades of storytelling, into one of the most genuinely felt depictions of a long marriage in the history of American television comedy. This is a significant claim. Most sitcom marriages are functional premises, the structure that produces the domestic comedy situations, rather than genuine emotional relationships that the audience believes in and invests in. Homer and Marge's marriage is different. It has texture, it has history, it has the specific quality of a relationship between two people who have learned each other so thoroughly that their interactions carry the accumulated weight of every prior interaction. When the show is at its best, depicting their relationship, you believe in them completely. The love is real. The show means it. 36 years of consistent work has made it mean what it means. And it coexists, has always coexisted, will always coexist until the show ends with a set of structural conditions that the show has been managing carefully rather than examining directly. Conditions that bear on the question of how free Marge's choices within the marriage have ever been, and whether the fullness of the love story requires the full picture of its context to be visible, or whether the full picture would change what you feel when you watch it. Let's be precise. Not cynical precision is not cynicism, and what the marriage requires here is precision, rather than the comfortable vagueness that has always protected it from this line of questioning. The first structural condition. Marge has no financial independence within the marriage. This is established across the show's run not through any dramatic declaration, but through the background facts of who earns money in the household and how. Homer earns. The plant pays. Marge manages the money Homer earns, which is a form of agency, but it is the agency of administration rather than the agency of generation. She has worked at various points in the show's history, the plant briefly, the police force, various small businesses and professional ventures that the individual episodes produce, and the following episodes do not sustain. None of these ventures became structural. None of them built into something that would support Marge independently if the marriage ended. The show has not dramatized this as a constraint. It has simply depicted the economic reality of the household without examining its implications. But the implications are present whether examined or not. A person without financial independence, in a marriage, has a practical relationship to the question of leaving that is materially different from the relationship a person with financial independence has to the same question. This does not determine what they feel. It shapes what leaving would cost. The second structural condition, the gravitational pull of Springfield itself. The show has depicted, across its run, a recurring pattern in which characters who attempt to build lives outside of Springfield tend to find themselves back in it. Not because leaving is impossible, characters leave, establish themselves elsewhere briefly, demonstrate the capacity for existence outside the town's gravity, but the pull is real. The specific combination of community, family connection, the weight of an identity built in a particular place over a long time, and something less definable that the radiation theory attempts to name and the coma theory attempts to explain this combination of forces keeps most people who try to leave from staying away. Marge's entire life is in Springfield. Her children's lives are in Springfield. Her extended family, Patty and Selma, her mother is in Springfield. Her history is in Springfield. The person she has become across the decades of the show's run is a person formed by and within Springfield, connected to it in ways that cannot be simply detached. To leave Springfield would be to leave not just Homer, but everything. The whole constructed self that the show has built for her. The identity, the history, the specific quality of being known by a community across a long time, which is a thing that people who have never had it sometimes underestimate, and people who have it almost never willingly surrender. The third structural condition is the most complex and the most resistant to being named without sounding reductive. The children. Marge is a mother. This is as fundamental to her characterization as Marge the wife. She does not experience these identities as separate, and the show does not depict them as separate. Her love for Bart, Lisa, and Maggie is as genuine and as central as her love for Homer. And the children's well-being, their need for the stability of an intact household, their dependence on the specific configuration of the family as it is a real consideration that operates alongside everything else Marge is carrying. This is not a constraint in the negative sense. A parent who considers their children's needs when making major life decisions is not trapped by those needs. But those needs are real, and they weight the calculus of any decision about the marriage in ways that the show has consistently depicted without explicitly naming. These three structural conditions, economic dependence, the gravitational pull of Springfield, The children's well-being are present in the background of every episode that depicts Marge's relationship to the marriage. They are part of the context within which her choices are made. And the show has been careful, very careful, to ensure that the foreground of those episodes is always the love, always the warmth, always the earned quality of the reconciliations, always the genuine feeling that confirms the marriage as a real thing rather than a structure of constraints. Because the love is real. That is not in question. The show has spent 36 years building its case for the love, and the case is unassailable. But love and constraint are not mutually exclusive. A person can genuinely love someone and be unable to leave them for reasons that are not purely love. A person can choose to stay in a marriage and have that choice be made for multiple reasons, simultaneously love among them, structural conditions among them, the accumulated momentum of a long life shared among them. The compound nature of the choice does not diminish the love, but it complicates the story of the choice as pure and unconstrained expression of feeling. The show has not wanted to tell the complicated version. It has wanted to tell the love story. And the love story is true. It is just not the whole story. There is a specific pattern in the episodes where the marriage is most directly at risk, where Marge comes closest to leaving, where the test is most severe that illustrates the show's management of this tension. In every such episode, Homer does something. Some act of gross negligence, or sustained selfishness, or simple catastrophic misapprehension of what Marge needs, pushes the marriage to a point where Marge's decision to stay requires active renewal rather than passive continuation. The episode builds to the point of maximum strain. And then Homer does something else, the grand gesture, the genuine communication, the moment of real vulnerability where the man underneath the comedy is briefly and actually present and the marriage renews. These renewals are real. The show earns them, usually, through the work of building the episode's emotional stakes carefully enough that the resolution carries genuine weight. When it works, and it works more often than the cynical reading of the formula would predict, you feel the renewal as something that happened, not just as a narrative convenience. But the pattern itself, Homer pushes, Homer redeems, the marriage renews, has a secondary effect that the show has never addressed. It places Homer at the center of the question of the marriage's continuity. Whether the marriage persists is, in every episode that puts it at risk, a function of what Homer does. He pushes it to the edge. He brings it back. He is the active agent. Marge responds. She is, in these episodes, reactive rather than active. She decides whether to accept the redemption, whether to renew the commitment, whether to stay. But the terms of the decision are Homer's terms. He set up the crisis. He offered the resolution. She accepts or she doesn't. In 36 years of episodes, Marge has never once put the marriage at risk through her own agency. She has never been the one who pushes it to the edge. Her crises in the marriage are always responsive. She is responding to something Homer did, something Homer failed to do, something in the situation that Homer's choices produced. She is never the source of the risk, always its recipient. This is consistent enough to be a characterization choice. The show has decided that Marge's role in the marriage's ongoing story is to choose to stay or to choose to leave in response to what Homer does, rather than to shape the terms of the story through her own decisions. And this characterization choice is itself a statement about what the show believes, at some level, about Marge's situation. She is not the agent of the marriage's story. She is its judge, the person whose assessment of Homer's latest failure or redemption determines whether the story continues. But the story is always the one Homer's choices have created. A fully free person in a fully chosen marriage would be a co-author of the marriage's story, not only its judge. The show has given Marge the judicial role and kept the authorial role with Homer, and this distribution tells you something about what the show believes, perhaps without having explicitly decided to believe it, about the nature of Marge's position in the relationship. None of this makes the love less real. The love is real. The tenderness in the best Homer and Marge scenes is genuinely earned. When Homer sits with Marge in the specific episodes where the show lets them be fully present with each other, when the comedy is suspended and the actual relationship is allowed to breathe, you believe in them with the completeness that the show has worked for 3 decades to produce. The love is real, the context of the love is complicated, And the show has spent 36 years making sure you feel the love clearly and the context only peripherally, that the warmth of the foreground keeps your attention, while the structure of the background remains softly out of focus. That is the mystery. At number 2, not whether the marriage should exist, not whether Marge made the wrong choice, not whether the love is insufficient. The mystery is whether the choice was fully free, whether the love is the whole story, whether the version of the marriage the show has been presenting is the complete picture, or the picture the show is most comfortable presenting. The show has never answered this. It has approached the question across dozens of episodes and retreated from the edge each time. Because answering it, committing to a view, would require the show to either affirm that Marge's choice was fully free and the marriage is the unconstrained expression of genuine love, which would require it to examine and dismiss the structural conditions that complicate that affirmation, or to acknowledge that the love is entangled with constraint in ways that change the story of the marriage. Either answer costs something. So the show keeps the warmth in the foreground, and the question in the soft background, and the marriage renews every Sunday night, and Homer goes back to the plant, and Marge goes back to the house, and the family on the couch is intact. And somewhere in the quiet between the episode ending and the next one beginning, in the space the show does not fill with anything, the question is still there, waiting for the show to be brave enough to ask it out loud. Section 12. Ranked number 1. What Springfield actually is. The answer that has been in every episode since the beginning, waiting for someone to sit still long enough to see it. Rank. Number 1. How badly the show wanted you to miss it. The show did not hide this one. It has been in plain sight since the opening credits of the first episode. In the theme song, in the couch gag, in the specific arrangement of the family in the opening sequence. We decided not to see it because seeing it fully would require acknowledging something about ourselves and our relationship to this show that the show itself has never demanded we acknowledge. Everything we have discussed tonight arrives here. 11 mysteries, each illuminating a different corner of Springfield, each pointing toward the same center. Maggie's silence and Sideshow Bob's revolving door, and the drunk driver and the mob, and the Halloween exemption, and Grandpa's shifting war record, and Burns's managed feelings, and Lisa's proximity to the whole picture, and Marge's closed-off self, and the school that builds the workers the plant needs, and the marriage that is held together by more than love. Each one a facet of the same structure. Each one asking the same question in a different language. What is Springfield? Not where that question has a non-answer that the show provided and then undermined. Everywhere and nowhere, every American town and no specific one. The place your place looks like when you squint at it with the right lens. The geography is settled, or settled in its unsettledness. The what is something else. And the answer, assembled from everything the show has placed in front of you across 36 seasons of Sunday evenings, is this. Springfield is a system that has reached a stable state, not a healthy stable state. Not the equilibrium of a community that has found its level through the natural balancing of its members' interests and capabilities. The equilibrium of a community that has been shaped through a long sequence of decisions made by specific people with specific interests, and through the accumulated inertia of those decisions being allowed to compound, rather than being challenged into a configuration that serves the people at the top of its power structure so thoroughly that genuine disruption has become nearly impossible. Burns provides the power provides the economy provides the employment provides the workers provide the compliance provides the continued operation of the plant that provides the power. The loop closes. The system sustains itself. Quimby provides the political cover. The political cover provides the regulatory environment. The regulatory environment provides the safety violations. The safety violations provide the contamination. The contamination provides the cognitive impairment. The cognitive impairment provides the voters who keep Quimby in office. The loop closes again. The school produces the workforce. The workforce accepts the conditions. The conditions sustain the school's institutional logic. The institutional logic produces the next workforce. The loop closes again. Fat Tony fills the gaps. The population that cannot access what it needs through legitimate channels can access it through Tony's network. This keeps the population from organizing around the deficits in the legitimate economy. It keeps the population divided between official and unofficial dependencies. It keeps the informal economy running in ways that benefit Tony and incidentally stabilize the whole structure. The loop closes again. These are not separate loops. They are the same loop, running through different institutional channels, producing the same outcome through different mechanisms. The outcome is a population that is employed, managed, impaired enough to not organize effectively, and attached to the town and its people deeply enough that the idea of leaving is not seriously entertained by most of them. This is Springfield. And now here is the thing the show has been building toward since the very first episode, the thing that is harder to say than everything else in this video and is also the most important thing. The show loves Springfield. Not the show's writers, though they clearly do. Not the audience, though we obviously do. The show itself, the creative entity that produced these 36 seasons, that made these choices about what to show and how to show it, that built this town, with this family in this configuration, and has been returning to it every Sunday night since 1989. The show loves Springfield, and this love is not naive. The show knows exactly what Springfield is. It has shown you across hundreds of episodes the contamination and the corruption and the school that builds workers and the marriage that is entangled with constraint and the silence of a child who understood too early that speaking cost too much. It has shown you all of it. It has never hidden it. But it has also shown you, in the same episodes, in the same frames, often in the same moment, the family on the couch, the Simpson family, together, in their house, at the end of the day, whatever the episode was about, whatever crisis or corruption or conspiracy or quiet sorrow had organized the preceding 22 minutes, the family comes home. They find each other. They are intact. The door closes against whatever is outside, and the warmth inside is real, is genuine, is the kind of warmth that requires the specific people in the specific configuration of this family to produce. Homer, who is damaged in specific ways that also produce a love for his family of extraordinary depth. Marge, who has closed things off to sustain the life, and who in doing so has become the specific person who can hold this household together. Bart, who has been told for his entire education that he is wrong, and who keeps being himself with a persistence that the show loves without quite naming what it is loving. Lisa, who sees too much and keeps looking anyway, keeps raising her hand, keeps believing that the seeing obligates the speaking. Maggie, who has made the most sophisticated assessment of her situation available and is acting on it with the kind of patience that only someone who has correctly understood her circumstances can sustain. These people in this configuration produce something that Springfield's power structure did not intend and cannot fully account for. They produce each other. They produce the specific warmth that radiates from 742 Evergreen Terrace in every episode, where the family is simply allowed to be together without a plot requiring them to be something else. That warmth is the show's real subject. Everything else, the contamination, the school, the marriage's entangled constraints, all of it is the context that surrounds the warmth and, paradoxically, makes it mean what it means. The warmth is warm because everything outside it is not. The love is precious because the world that contains it is dangerous in ways the family cannot fully see. The couch is sacred because the town that surrounds the house has been doing everything available to it for decades to produce the exact opposite of what the family on the couch represents. And they are still there. Homer chose the fog. He was right to choose it, in a specific and complicated way that the show has never quite articulated but has always understood. Not right in the sense that choosing ignorance is ever the objectively correct decision. Right in the sense that the clarity, available briefly during the crayon's removal, was unbearable specifically because it required him to see the gap between what his family deserved and what he could provide, what Springfield was and what he could do about it. The clarity produced not empowerment but despair, and a man who genuinely loves his family, in the specific configuration that Homer loves his, cannot afford sustained despair. He needs to be able to show up, to come home, to be present in the warmth, imperfect and foggy and frequently catastrophic, but present. He chose the fog because the fog lets him be present. And the show, which loves Homer, and has spent 36 years building the case for why he is worth loving, agrees with the choice. Not morally, not as an affirmation that choosing impairment over clarity is virtuous, but emotionally, in the deep way that art agrees with the characters it cares about most, It understands why he chose it, and it honors the love that made the choice feel necessary. This is the show's most honest and most difficult position. It loves a man who chose not to understand his own situation fully because not understanding was the only way to keep loving the life he was living. And it builds its entire emotional architecture around that love 36 seasons of Sunday nights, organized around the radical, irrational, completely human insistence that love is worth preserving even at the cost of clarity. Burns wins, in the narrow structural sense. The plant keeps running. The contamination keeps flowing. The school keeps producing the right workforce. The political corruption keeps cycling. The mob keeps operating. The equilibrium holds. Burns's investment in Springfield's particular configuration of power has produced exactly the stable return he designed it to produce. But the family is on the couch. And the family on the couch is the thing Burns cannot engineer, cannot buy, cannot suppress, cannot contaminate. He can damage Homer's cognition. He can impair the town's capacity for organized resistance. He can manipulate the institutions that shape the population's possibilities. He can do all of this and has done all of this for decades. And Homer still loves Marge, and Marge still loves her children, and Lisa still raises her hand, and Bart still finds the joke that reveals the absurdity of the system. And Maggie still watches everything with those enormous eyes, waiting for the moment that the show has never quite allowed her to reach, carrying her one word in the pocket of her silence. This is the mystery at number 1. Not what Springfield is, we have mapped that. Not who is responsible, Burns is responsible. And the show has shown you this, and it will continue showing you this for as long as it runs. The mystery at number 1 is, given everything, given the full account of what Springfield is and what it has done to the family that lives inside it, why does the warmth survive? Why is the love real? How does a family so thoroughly embedded in a system designed to impair them manage to produce, again and again, the specific quality of human connection that the couch scenes carry? The show's answer, which it has been delivering across 36 seasons without ever stating explicitly, is this: because the people are real. Not real in the literal sense, they are animated characters, constructs, ink and color and digital rendering. But real in the sense that art makes real. Their inner lives are actual, their feelings are genuine, their choices matter. Their love for each other is not diminished by being embedded in a context that was designed to prevent exactly that love from sustaining itself. The system tried. It produced the contamination and the cognitive impairment, and the institutional suppression, and the managed forgetting and the collective amnesia. It did everything available to it, and the family came home anyway, every Sunday night, for 36 years. And this is where the mystery at number 1 opens into the deepest dimension of what we have been talking about all night. Because the family comes home in the show. But we come home too. We, the audience, have been coming home to Springfield for 36 years, or for the years we have been watching, or since childhood, or since college, or since whatever moment the show first reached us and became part of the furniture of how our imagination works. We have been coming home to this house, this family, this couch. And the question underneath all the other questions, the one ranked at number 1 is why? The show gives us the answer, not in any single episode, but in the cumulative effect of the whole thing. We come home to Springfield because it is us, not metaphorically, not as a marketing slogan. The show knows this and has always known it. The contamination and the corruption and the school that builds workers and the marriage with its entangled constraints, this is not just Springfield. This is the structure of most places most people have lived. The powerful interests who shape the conditions of the town without ever announcing themselves. The institutional logic that produces the right distribution of graduates for the dominant employer. The marriage that is held together by love, and also by the accumulated weight of history and dependence. The child who sees too much and is told too often that seeing does not matter. The child who understands the silence is protection. The grandfather who revised the story until the story was bearable. These are universal. The show put them in Springfield and put Springfield in America and built the whole thing into the most beloved animated series in the history of television because it understood that the Springfield in front of you is a mirror for the Springfield you already know. And the couch, the family coming home. Homer finding his way back to them, episode after episode, across 36 years, in every form the plot can take him away, and that is universal too. We come home to this show because it is doing what the best art does. It is showing us our own situation, clearly enough to recognize it, and alongside the recognition, it is showing us that the love is real anyway. That people in imperfect, damaged, structurally compromised lives can love each other with the full weight of actual love. That the couch in a contaminated town is still a couch where a family can find each other at the end of the day. That is not a small thing. That might be the largest thing. The show has been saying it since the 17th of December, 1989, in every episode, in the theme song, in the couch gag, in the specific arrangement of the family in the opening credits, the moment when Homer misses Maggie, thinks she is gone, and then she crawls into frame and the family unit is complete. The family is always almost incomplete, and then the missing piece arrives and the picture closes. 36 seasons, 800 episodes. The most analyzed, the most theorized, the most dissected show in the history of American television. And after all of that, after the contamination theory and the coma theory and the who shot Burns mystery and the revolving door and the Halloween exemption and the school that builds workers and the marriage and Marge's closed-off self and Maggie's sealed word and Grandpa's revised war and the impossibility of Burns's continued existence and the geometry of Lisa's perpetual near arrival after all of it, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? The show has an answer to this too. You have been carrying it all night without knowing it. It surfaced in the Treehouse of Horror reading, and in the Homer choosing the fog moment, and in the school's systematic production of the right workers, and in the marriage's entangled warmth, and in Maggie's one. Word preserved in perfect amber. We cannot let them go because they are the version of us that chose to stay. The version that had the whole picture available to it, the contamination, the corruption, the structural constraints, the impairments, all of it, and chose anyway to come home, to be on the couch, to be the family, in this house, in this town, where everything is wrong and everything is theirs. Homer is us at our most damaged and our most loving. Marge is us at our most capable and our most constrained. Bart is us at our most creative and our most misread. Lisa is us at our most clear-sighted and our most frustrated. Maggie is us at our most observant and our most strategically silent. They are each a version of the choice. The choice to stay in a life that is imperfect in specific, structural, often designed ways, because the love in that life is real and the warmth is real and the couch at the end of the day is real, and the clarity that would require us to leave is not always worth what it costs. And the show understands this choice. It has been built around it. Every episode that ends with the family intact is the show reaffirming, through the simple persistence of the ending, that the choice is still being made, that the family keeps choosing each other, that Marge keeps choosing to stay, that Homer keeps finding his way home, that Bart keeps being himself in a world that keeps telling him to stop, that Lisa keeps raising her hand despite the consistent inadequacy of the response, that Maggie keeps watching with those eyes, waiting, saying nothing, carrying her one word like a promise she has not yet decided to keep. Springfield does not exist on any map. It exists in the specific part of the human heart that chooses love over clarity, warmth over truth, the couch over the door, the family over the full understanding of what the family is embedded in. And that part of the heart is very large. And we have been going there every Sunday night for 36 years. And we will keep going, because the family is always there, because the couch is always warm, because Homer always finds his way home, because Maggie always crawls into frame at the last second and the family unit closes around her, and because somewhere in a town that does not appear on any map, in a house on a street with an impossible name, under a sky lit by the green glow of a power plant that has been running violations for decades, a family keeps choosing each other, not because they have to, because it is the truest thing available to them, and it is the truest thing available to us. That is Springfield. That is every mystery. That is the whole show. Outro. And that is all 12 mysteries, ranked from 12 to 1, from the smallest buried detail to the thing that has been in plain sight since the first note of the theme song. You made it. That was a long night in Springfield. The right kind of long, the kind that moves slowly enough to settle, that lets things land where they are supposed to land, that ends with you knowing something you did not quite know before. Even if you suspected it, the show is still running. It will probably keep running past any reasonable endpoint, which is itself a kind of answer to the question we have been circling all night. The show keeps going because we keep watching. We keep watching because the family keeps coming home. The family keeps coming home because that is what the show does, what it has always done, what it will keep doing in every episode until the one where it stops. And when it stops, the couch will still be warm in the memory. The family will still be there, exactly as they were. Bart still 10, Lisa still 8. Maggie still watching with her words sealed away inside her. The fog over Springfield, green and soft. The plant on the horizon, still running. The house on Evergreen Terrace, lights on. Good night. And wherever you are right now, whatever city, whatever hour, whatever version of the dark, drop it in the comments. Someone on the other side of the world is in the same quiet watching this same video, and they would like to know they are not alone in it. Sleep well. Springfield will be there in the morning. It always is. Expansion Block 1. Insert after Section 1. Maggie's first word. Additional analysis. The silent language Maggie developed and what it means for the family. There is something else worth exploring about Maggie's silence before we move on, something that requires looking at the episodes that feature her most centrally and examining what they collectively say about the choice she made. The Longest Daycare, the theatrical short released in 2012 and nominated for an Academy Award, is 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson operating at the highest cognitive level the show has ever depicted for any character. Not the highest for a child, the highest. Period. The sequence of decisions Maggie makes during the daycare escape the environmental reading, the threat identification, the strategic planning, the adaptive execution of a multi-step operation under time pressure with limited physical capability represents a level of problem-solving that would be impressive in an adult, that would be genuinely exceptional in a trained professional, and that in a 1-year-old who cannot reliably walk without falling is so far outside normal parameters that the show can only get away with depicting it because it treats the whole thing as wordless physical comedy. Without the words, it reads as cute. With the words, if Maggie narrated her own decision process in real time, the same sequence of events would be terrifying in its specificity. She reads the environment on entry. She identifies the power structure of the daycare facility, who has authority, who enforces it, where the pressure points are. She identifies the threat, Gerald, the baby with the unibrow, who wants to destroy the chrysalis she has decided to protect. She assesses her own capabilities honestly, which requires the kind of accurate self-modeling that most adults consistently fail to perform. She understands exactly what she can do, what she cannot do, and what she would need to do differently to compensate for the gaps between her physical capability and the demands of the situation. She constructs a plan, not a simple plan, a plan with contingencies, with redundancy, with enough flexibility to adapt when the first approach fails. She executes it. She fails. She revises. She executes again. She succeeds. And then, in the final moments of the short, when the butterfly is free and the mission is complete, she does what she always does. She assumes the infant posture, the passive, helpless, dependent presentation, the disguise, because the daycare staff is watching again. The clarity of that choice, the conscious decision, in the moment of success, to immediately reassume the cover identity is the clearest window the show ever gives you into Maggie's strategic mind. She does not allow herself the luxury of being seen in her success. The moment the audience that cannot know about her capability is watching, she becomes the baby again, and the chrysalis opens, and the butterfly goes free, and Maggie watches it go with an expression the short holds for exactly long enough to tell you something not quite satisfaction, not quite pride, something more contained than either, and then the credits roll. She did something extraordinary. She will never be known for it. The family will not find out. The daycare staff will not find out. The audience knows, and Maggie knows we know, and the look at the end of the short is the only acknowledgement she will allow. This is the fully realized version of the strategy she settled on after spending her first several months watching how Springfield responds to capability made visible. She is right. The strategy works. And the cost of it, the permanent suppression of everything she is, in every context where being seen would be dangerous, is so familiar to her that she has stopped experiencing it as a cost. That is what the silence contains. Not unexpressed potential, fully developed potential, consciously contained, strategically deployed in the moments when deployment matters, and strategically hidden in every other moment. Maggie Simpson is the most dangerous person in Springfield. She has been since before she could walk. And the show put this in front of you in a 7-minute theatrical short that most people received as a charming piece of silent comedy about a baby protecting a butterfly. The butterfly is a symbol. The show knows it is a symbol. What it symbolizes the fragile, beautiful thing that exists inside Maggie, and that she is protecting from the Gerald-shaped forces that would destroy it. The potential she is keeping alive in the private space of her own internal life, against the pressure of an environment that would crush it. The show leaves that part for you to figure out. She said one word. She said it once, perfectly, to the right person at the right moment. And then she went back to watching. Because in Springfield, the watching is the work. Expansion Block 2. Insert after Section 2. Sideshow Bob. Additional analysis. What Bob's cultural pedigree says about Springfield's pretensions. There is a dimension of the Sideshow Bob mystery that we have not addressed, and that the show embeds so deeply inside the comedy of his characterization that it requires a second approach to locate. Bob is operatic. Not metaphorically, he is literally operatic, a character who expresses himself through Gilbert and Sullivan, who quotes Shakespeare with the ease of someone for whom the great works of Western culture are the primary language of inner experience, who brings to his villainy the commitment of someone who believes that the appropriate way to conduct a life, even a criminal one, is with theatrical grandeur and intellectual reference, and the full deployment of whatever cultural sophistication one has accumulated. He is, by every measure that Springfield's power structure does not reward, one of the most accomplished people in the town. His education is real. His intellectual engagement with the world around him is genuine. His capacity for the kind of critical analysis that the show's writers clearly value is exceeded only by Lisa's. And he spends this capacity trying to murder a 10-year-old. This is the joke, the gap between the sophistication and the application. The high culture sensibility deployed toward low culture purpose. It is funny because the mismatch is large, and because Bob commits to the mismatch with a sincerity that makes it funnier. He does not think he is wasted on this. He thinks Bart Simpson is a worthy adversary, precisely because Bart is the specific threat to his self-perception that only an individual with Bart's particular qualities can represent. But the joke also contains a serious observation about Springfield and what it does to people like Bob. Springfield has no use for what Bob has. His intellect, his cultural sophistication, his genuine capability, these qualities do not translate into anything the Springfield economy rewards or the Springfield social structure accommodates. There is no role in Springfield for someone of Bob's profile except the role he has carved out for himself, which is villain, which is antagonist, which is the person who tries to kill the Simpson boy and keeps failing and going back to prison. This is what Springfield offers him. A career of failure in the theatrical mode of his choosing. And Bob accepts this. He accepts it with more grace than the situation deserves, which is itself a kind of statement about his character. He has found the only form of self-expression available to him in a town that has no other use for what he is, and he has committed to it with everything he has. The show loves him for this. The audience loves him for this. There is something deeply recognizable in the figure of the person who brings extraordinary capability to a situation that does not require it and does not reward it, who refuses to reduce themselves to what the situation asks for, who insists on being fully themselves even when fully themselves means being theatrical and erudite and occasionally murderous. But the deeper observation, the one the comedy keeps you from sitting with too long, is that Springfield produced this. The same system that processes Bart into a failing fourth grader and impairs Homer's cognition and suppresses Lisa's exceptionalism and keeps Fat Tony operating and lets Burns run his plant for decades without serious accountability. This same system took Robert Underdunk, Terwilliger Jr., a person of genuine capability and real cultural sophistication and authentic intellectual ambition, and gave him nowhere to go except the prison and the vendetta and the rake. He is not a villain because he was born wrong. He is a villain because Springfield is the kind of place that produces this specific outcome from this specific starting material. Put a person of Bob's profile in a different environment, a city with real cultural institutions, a community that values what he values, An economy that has room for the kind of intelligence he has, and you get something entirely different. You get a conductor, or a professor, or a person who reads Gilbert and Sullivan privately and professionally, and directs his considerable energies towards something that does not result in prison. You get someone Springfield can't produce. Because Springfield is not built to produce that. It is built to produce what it has. Burns's workers, Quimby's voters, Tony's customers, and the occasional Bob someone too capable for the system to fully contain but with nowhere else to go, circling the same small town in the same small costume, failing at the same task, going back to prison, coming out again. The revolving door is not just a justice system failure. It is Springfield making room for the one form of outlet available to someone the system could not fully process. Bob cannot be Homer. He is too aware of what he is in. He cannot be Lisa. He cannot sustain hope against the evidence the way Lisa does. He cannot be Burns. He does not have a century of resources and does not want the particular form of power Burns has built. So he is Bob. Theatrical, brilliant, operatic, murderous, beloved, cycling through the prison door with the reliability of a season. And the show has been using his comedy to prevent you from noticing that this is what a specific kind of community does to a specific kind of person. Expansion Block 3, insert within Section 5, Treehouse of Horror. Additional analysis, the specific episodes that push furthest and what they reveal. The Treehouse of Horror episodes that push furthest into the show's actual anxieties are worth examining individually because the specificity of what they reach for tells you something about what the show has been holding throughout its regular seasons. Treehouse of Horror 4 contains a segment called The Devil and Homer Simpson, in which Homer sells his soul to the devil for a donut. The premise is the classic Faust deal, and the show plays it with the specific Simpsons inflection. Homer eats most of the donut before the devil can collect, and the case goes to a trial in which a jury of historical villains ultimately rules in Homer's favor because Marge's love is the decisive factor. The segment is funny and warm and ends well. But look at what the show is actually saying underneath the comedy. Homer's eternal soul is worth a donut. He would trade the thing that his religious tradition tells him is his most essential and irreplaceable possession for the immediate gratification of something he consumes every day and can obtain for cents. The joke lands because it is perfectly in character. Homer would absolutely do this. But the joke also says something precise about what the show believes about Homer's relationship to his own worth. A man whose cognition has been impaired by decades of radiation exposure, who was damaged by a system designed to keep him impaired, who works at the plant that is responsible for the impairment this man has internalized. At some level, the system's assessment of his value. His soul is worth a donut. He believes this deeply enough to act on it reflexively, without hesitation. The devil in the segment is not Burns, but he could be. The deal Homer makes his most essential self for the thing that keeps him functional in the present moment is the deal he makes every day when he goes to the plant. His labor, his health, his cognition, his connection to the fuller version of himself that surfaces when the crayon is temporarily removed. All of it traded for the wages that pay for the house and the beer and the donut and the couch. The Treehouse segment makes this visible by literalizing it. The devil shows up, Homer signs the paper, and the deal is done. In the regular episodes, the deal is made every Monday morning when Homer drives to work, and nobody notices it because there is no devil with a contract to make it legible. A later segment, from Treehouse of Horror 7, introduces two aliens, Kang and Kodos, who have replaced the major candidates in the American presidential election. When the deception is exposed, the townspeople are told they must now choose between two aliens. Someone in the crowd suggests voting for a third-party candidate, and Kang responds with the contemptuous efficiency of someone who understands how the system works. Go ahead, throw your vote away. The joke is about American electoral reality. The specific reality being joked about the two-party system that leaves voters choosing between options they did not choose, in an election process that has already been captured before they arrive, is the same reality that keeps Quimby in office in Springfield, that keeps Burns's plant operating, that keeps the mob's informal government running alongside the official one. The show cannot stage this critique in a regular episode. A regular episode that depicted Springfield's elections as structurally captured rather than democratically functional would require the show to either follow the critique to some conclusion or to retract it and neither option is available within the regular continuity. So it stages it in October as alien comedy, with a punchline that the audience will quote for years without always remembering what the punchline was actually about. Go ahead, throw your vote away. Homer listens to this and chooses Kang, because the system has already produced a situation in which Kang is the rational choice. The aliens win. Springfield, enslaved, builds a giant ray gun. The townspeople console themselves with the standard, crusty-voiced line about remembering this at the polls, to which Kang replies, "What are you going to do? It's a two-party system." This is a perfect encapsulation of what Springfield's power structure actually is. The choices were already made before anyone arrived to vote. The options on offer serve the people who produce the options, and the population, too impaired and too normalized to organize resistance, consents to the system by participating in it. The show cannot say this in November, so it says it in October, in an alien comedy with a laugh track, and November comes, Expansion Block 4, insert within Section 9, Marge. Additional analysis. The 3 times the show almost told the full truth about Marge and what stopped it. There are specific episodes across the show's run where the writing gets closer to the full truth about Marge's situation than anywhere else, and examining what happens in each of them, how the episode builds toward the truth, and what mechanism the show uses to redirect before arriving, tells you something important about the show's relationship to this particular territory. The first is the already discussed gambling episode. Last Exit to Springfield is sometimes confused with it, so let's be specific. The gambling addiction is dealt with in a Season 5 episode called Dollar Springfield, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Legalized Gambling. The episode builds Marge's addiction across its runtime, with unusual specificity, not just the behavior, but the psychology, the specific quality of the casino environment that reaches something in her, the way she finds in the gambling a form of competence and control that her ordinary life does not provide. At the point of maximum honesty, the moment when the episode has built its case clearly enough that the show has almost stated what it actually means. Springfield is hit by a crisis that requires Marge's return to competence in the domestic sphere. The show pulls her back into crisis management, into the functional role, into the form of capability that the household recognizes and rewards. And the episode resolves, with the family intact and Marge's gambling acknowledged as a problem rather than as a symptom of something larger. The larger thing is right there. The episode built it. And then the crisis pulled Marge back into the more familiar register before the show had to name what she had been reaching for. The second episode is Homer vs. Patty and Selma from Season 6, which is primarily about Homer's financial crisis and his debt to Marge's sisters. But in the background of this episode, in the scenes where Marge navigates between Homer's humiliation and her sister's contempt, there are moments where the show lets you see Marge's divided self with unusual clarity. The person she is with Homer, and the person she might have been if she had followed her sister's trajectory, not into their specific personalities, which are not appealing, but into the independence that the trajectory represents. The episode does not develop this. It is not the episode's subject. But it places Marge in the position of mediating between 2 versions of what her life might have been, the life she chose and the life her sisters represent. And it catches her face in the mediation in ways that do not quite resolve into either contentment or regret. Something more ambiguous, something that the episode moves past before naming. The third episode is the most significant and requires the most careful handling. In the Season 7 episode A Fish Called Selma, the focus is on Troy McClure's career rehabilitation through a fake marriage to Selma. But woven through the episode, in Selma's experience of being in a marriage organized around someone else's needs rather than her own, is a parallel story about what it means to be a woman in Springfield who has subordinated herself to a role. The episode does not apply this parallel to Marge directly. It is Selma's story. But the parallel is present in the structural resonance between Selma's situation in the fake marriage and Marge's situation in her real one, the ways in which both women are valuable primarily for what they provide rather than for who they are, the ways in which the institution of the relationship has become the organizing framework for the identity rather than the reverse. The show places this right in front of you and expects you to make the connection, but it does not make the connection for you because making it explicitly would require the show to commit to a view of Marge's marriage that it has spent its entire run carefully not committing to. In all three cases, the gambling episode, the financial crisis episode, the Selma parallel, the show builds toward the honest statement and then stops just short of it. Not from timidity exactly. From love, the show loves Marge too much to say the hard thing clearly. Because saying it clearly would require the audience to decide what they think about her life, and the show cannot control what decision the audience makes. So it keeps the question just below the surface, visible to anyone looking, invisible to anyone who prefers not to look, which is, now that we name it, exactly what Marge does. Expansion Block 5. Insert within Section 10. Springfield Elementary. Additional analysis. The Armin Tamzarian revelation and what it means for the school's institutional integrity. We need to return to Principal Skinner because the Armin Tamzarian revelation, the disclosure in Season 9's The Principal and the Pauper, that the man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner for 2 decades, is actually Armin Tamzarian, a former street punk who assumed the identity of a Vietnam POW, is not just a controversial story choice. It is the most direct statement the show has ever made about the specific kind of institutional fraud that Springfield's educational system has been running. The real Seymour Skinner, the one who comes back, the war hero who survived capture and escaped and came home to find someone else living his life, this man is genuine. His military service is documented. His claim to the name and the history and the mother are legitimate. He is, by every verifiable standard, more qualified to be Seymour Skinner than the man who has been presenting himself as Seymour Skinner. Springfield votes to keep the fake. The judge issues a legal decree making it illegal to speak the truth. The real Skinner is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from the community. And Armin Tamzarian resumes his life as Seymour Skinner, walking back into Springfield Elementary with the full legal endorsement of the community he has been deceiving for 2 decades. The episode is universally reviled by fans. It is cited constantly as one of the worst in the show's history. The criticism is valid on its own terms. The episode does real damage to a character the audience had invested in. It retroactively hollows out 20 seasons of Skinner characterization, and it resolves through a narrative convenience, the legal decree, making truth illegal, that is so blunt it feels lazy rather than satirical. But the criticism misses what the episode is doing at the level of Springfield's social mechanism. Because what the episode depicts is not unusual. It is the most naked, the most legible, the most explicit version of something Springfield does in every episode and every season. The episode does not introduce a new behavior. It shows you the existing behavior in slow motion, with the machinery visible. Springfield chooses the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. And it does not just choose it passively. It makes the choice active, institutional, legally binding. It does not just forget the truth. It criminalizes remembering. It does not just prefer the fake. It exiles the genuine. And it does this in the context of the school, the institution responsible for the education of the town's children, the place where, in any functional community, the commitment to truth and evidence and honest accounting of reality is supposed to be most carefully maintained. The school has been running on a fake identity for 20 years. The town knows this. The town endorses it. The town makes it illegal to say otherwise. And the children keep attending Springfield Elementary. And the teachers keep teaching. And the failing grades keep accumulating. And Lisa keeps sitting in the 3rd grade with her hand raised. And Bart keeps failing classes designed to produce exactly the outcome he is currently producing. And the school keeps generating the workforce the plant needs, under a principal who is not who he says he is, in a town that voted to maintain the fiction, supervised by a judiciary that made the truth a crime. That is the school. Not just incompetent, not just underfunded, running on deliberate institutional fraud endorsed at the highest levels of the community's authority. And the comedy has been covering it for 36 years so effectively that the episode that made it most visible is remembered as a bad episode about continuity, rather than as the moment the show told you exactly what kind of institution the school is. The fans were outraged at the wrong thing. Expansion Block 6. Insert within Section 12. What Springfield actually is? Additional analysis. The floating timeline as the deepest expression of the loop. We have been circling the floating timeline all night without naming it directly, and it deserves its own moment before we close, because the floating timeline is the mechanism through which everything else in this ranking is perpetuated. Bart has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have been in their mid-30s, give or take, for 36 years of real time. The industry term for this is floating timeline. The present is always the present, whatever year the episode airs in, and the characters' ages do not advance with the calendar. Most people accept this as a standard animated television convention without examining what it means for the specific show that uses it. But The Simpsons has used the floating timeline for longer than any other show in history. The consequences of using it for 36 years rather than, say, 7 or 10, are different in kind rather than just in degree. A floating timeline over 7 years is a production convenience. A floating timeline over 36 years is a statement about time itself. What has the show said, across 36 years of the same ages, about what time means in Springfield? Time passes everywhere except here. Cultural references change. The characters have flip phones, then smartphones. They reference current events. The technology around them advances with the years. But the people do not change. The relationships do not change. The fundamental configuration of the family does not change. This is not how real families work. Real families are organized by time, by children growing up and leaving home, by parents aging and retiring and eventually dying, by the gradual shifts in relationship dynamic that every long-term human connection undergoes as the people in it change. A family frozen in time is not a family in any recognizable sense. It is a diorama, a preserved moment. Springfield is a diorama. The show has built, across 36 years, the world's most elaborate and most emotionally sophisticated diorama of a family at a specific moment in their lives, with every detail maintained in perfect preservation while the world around the case keeps changing. And the question the floating timeline forces you to ask if you sit with it long enough, which the comedy has been preventing you from doing, is, who is doing the preserving? Within the show's world, who or what is maintaining the stasis? The coma theory has one answer: Homer's unconscious mind, preserving the family at the moment he last saw them clearly. The radiation theory has another: biological mutations so profound that the normal processes of aging have been suspended at the cellular level. The institutional capture theory, which is what we have been building all night, has a third: the power structure that depends on the family's situation remaining exactly as it is, has engineered the stasis as an extension of the same mechanism that keeps the plant running, and the elections rigged, and the school producing the right workers. Burns's empire depends on Homer being exactly who Homer is. A different Homer, the Homer who briefly emerged when the crayon was removed, the one with the intact cognition, the one who could connect the dots between Burns and Mona, and the deal, and the contamination, and everything else would be a threat to everything Burns has built. The impaired Homer, the foggy Homer, the Homer who chooses the donut over the eternal soul and the fog over the clarity, is the Homer Burns needs. The floating timeline from this perspective is Burns's greatest achievement. Not a single dramatic act, but the accumulated effect of decades of managed impairment. A family so thoroughly contained within their circumstances that they cannot grow, cannot change, cannot develop past the configuration they were in when the containment was fully established. Bart cannot grow up because a grown Bart is a Bart who can see his own situation clearly and has the adult capability to act on what he sees. Lisa cannot grow up because a grown Lisa finishes the puzzle. Maggie cannot grow up because a grown Maggie speaks. Marge cannot grow up because a grown Marge, a Marge with the resources and the history and the full account of her own life, might make a different choice about what she is willing to sustain. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is the show's most honest depiction of what a captured community looks like from the inside. The people stay the same age not because the animators are lazy or because the format requires it, but because the system that contains them is working exactly as designed. Containment is perfect when nothing changes. Burns has built perfect containment, and within the containment, the family is warm. The love is real. The couch is where they come home to. The diorama is beautiful. It is the most beautiful prison in the history of television. And we press our faces against the glass and watch them in there, and they look happy, and they are happy, as much as people can be happy inside a structure built to keep them exactly where they are. And we keep watching. Year after year, season after season, Sunday night after Sunday night. Because the warmth is real, because the love is real, because we recognize ourselves in there, inside the glass, inside the loop, inside the permanent present of a life that is imperfect and constrained and surrounded by structural forces designed to keep it from changing, and that is nevertheless a life, a genuinely human life, with genuine love at its center, with a family that chooses each other again and again across every obstacle the system can produce. That is what Springfield actually is. That is what we actually love. And knowing it does not diminish the loving. It just gives the loving its proper weight. Expansion Block 7 Additional Mystery. Hans Moleman, the body count, and what Springfield's relationship with death actually is. There is a man in Springfield who has been dying for 36 years, and nobody has ever stopped to ask why he keeps coming back. Hans Moleman, the tiny, nearly blind elderly man whose primary function in the show is to suffer and occasionally die, is one of the most frequently killed characters in the history of American animation. This is a documented fact, not an impression. He has been struck by cars, crushed by objects, buried alive, incinerated, struck by lightning, consumed by animals, and subjected to a variety of other terminal experiences across the show's entire run. Not in the Treehouse of Horror episodes where death is explicitly non-canonical, in regular episodes, in the main continuity, in the same episodes where Homer has conversations with Marge and Bart goes to school, and the plot proceeds toward its conclusion. And then Hans Moleman appears in the next episode, completely unharmed, ready to be killed again. The show never addresses this. It never explains it. It does not treat Moleman's deaths as events that require continuity management. He simply dies, and then he is not dead, and the next episode begins, and he is in the background of a Springfield crowd scene, present, alive, waiting. Most viewers accept this as a running gag. The Moleman death is a joke, a reliable piece of visual comedy that the show has been deploying for decades, with the confidence of a writer who knows the gag always lands. You do not question why he keeps coming back any more than you question why the Simpsons stay the same age. It is just how the show works. But there is a detail about Hans Moleman that the show drops once, almost as a throwaway, that changes the nature of the running gag entirely. Moleman states his age as 31. 31 years old. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s, possibly his 90s. He has the physical presentation of a man who has been old for so long that the concept of youth is geological in its distance. His body is frail in a way that suggests decades of accumulated damage. His eyesight is so poor that he requires thick glasses for basic navigation of a world that continues to injure him at every turn. He walks with the careful uncertainty of someone whose body has been through things. If he is telling the truth, and there is no narrative reason given in the episode for him to be lying about this, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in what should have been the physical prime of his life and produced the appearance of extreme elderly decrepitude across a span of time that does not add up. Something that also, apparently, makes him nearly indestructible. He is killed repeatedly and keeps coming back. He is aged far beyond his years and yet continues to function. He has absorbed more physical damage per episode of screen time than almost any other character, and continues to appear in subsequent episodes without apparent memory of what happened. Put these together: premature catastrophic aging, apparent indestructibility, continuous recovery from fatal physical events, and a presence in Springfield that spans the show's entire run. The radiation theory offers the most coherent account. If the nuclear power plant's contamination is affecting Springfield's residents in different ways, depending on specific biological vulnerabilities and exposure patterns, then Moleman might represent the extreme case, the person whose biology responded to the contamination in the most dramatically visible way. The aging acceleration is an expression of radiation's effect on cellular processes. The indestructibility is an expression of the same contamination that has altered every biological system in Springfield, taken to an extreme where normal mortality no longer applies. He is not dying in any meaningful sense when the show kills him. He is experiencing a biological event that resembles death from the outside but from which he recovers, because whatever the radiation has done to his cellular structure has eliminated the permanent mortality that normal biology produces. Springfield on this reading has at least two cases of what might be called radiation immortality. Burns, who sustains his impossible lifespan through weekly treatments that manage the contamination's effects, and Molman, who sustains his through an accidental biological reconfiguration so complete that death has become a revolving door rather than an ending. Neither of them ages normally. Neither of them stays dead. Both of them have been in Springfield for the entirety of the show's run, accumulating their respective versions of physical damage and recovering from both with the consistency of systems that have found equilibrium with something that should be lethal. Burns manages his condition through the deliberate application of resources and expertise. Molman manages his through what appears to be luck, the specific luck of a biology that happened to adapt in a direction that produces recovery rather than progressive failure. And the show has been depicting both of them in separate comedy registers for 36 years. Burns in the sinister mode, the powerful man who bought his way out of the consequence that radiation produces in everyone else. Molman in the absurdist mode, the hapless everyman who is killed by everything and recovers from everything and never seems to accumulate any wisdom from the accumulation. Together, they are a statement about what the contamination has done to Springfield at both extremes of the social spectrum. The billionaire weaponized the contamination, turned it into a managed condition that extends his life while it degrades everyone else's, and maintains his position at the top of the power structure by controlling the resource that everyone else needs to survive. The ordinary man is accidentally indestructible, functionally immune to the death that the contamination was supposed to accelerate, aged beyond recognition but functionally persistent. A man the system cannot kill, despite trying repeatedly, who keeps showing up in the background of scenes, who keeps being in the crowd when Springfield gathers, who keeps surviving the town that keeps trying to end him. There is something almost hopeful in Molman, examined through this lens. Not a heroic character, he is never allowed to be heroic. He exists primarily to suffer comedy, but a structural one. The version of Springfield's contamination story that does not resolve in Burns's favor. The man the radiation could not finish. The show has kept him alive for 36 years for the same reason it keeps Burns alive, because they are both expressions of the same fact about the town, from opposite ends of the social spectrum. Springfield is a place where death has been made negotiable. Burns bought his negotiation, Molman stumbled into his. The town between them keeps dying and forgetting it died and going back to normal. Expansion Block 8. Additional mystery, the geography question, and why Springfield cannot be located. Springfield has no fixed location. This is one of the show's most famous and most consistently maintained creative decisions. Matt Groening has acknowledged that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up, but the show has never committed to a specific state, a specific geography, or a specific set of physical facts about where Springfield sits in relation to the rest of America. This is almost universally read as a creative choice intended to make Springfield universally relatable, a town that could be any American town, that does not have the specificity of location that would exclude viewers who live somewhere else. And that reading is correct. The writers have confirmed it. Springfield is everywhere and nowhere. That is intentional. But the geographic impossibility that the show produces through this choice Springfield, with mountains and oceans and deserts and farmland all within driving distance, Springfield that borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky depending on which episode you are watching, Springfield that has blizzards and tropical heat waves in the same year, this impossibility goes further than a simple choice to avoid committing to a state. Springfield's geography changes, not just between seasons, which would suggest inconsistency. Within the world of the show, the physical reality of Springfield shifts. The mountains are sometimes close and sometimes absent. The coastline appears and disappears. The climate is whatever the episode requires. The town has no stable physical anchoring in the world, and within the logic of the show's other established facts, this makes a strange kind of sense. If the contamination theory is correct, if the nuclear plant's radiation has been fundamentally altering the biological and possibly the physical reality of Springfield for decades, then the geographic instability is not an anomaly. It is a symptom. The same contamination that has altered the residents' biology, that has produced four-fingered yellow people who survive fatal injuries, that has generated three-eyed fish in the local waterways, this same contamination, at whatever extreme it has reached after decades of accumulated exposure, might have effects that extend beyond the biological. Physics is not exempt from chemistry. Chemistry is not exempt from radiation. The specific combination of factors that has produced Springfield's biological impossibilities might have also produced physical ones. Springfield cannot be located because Springfield exists in a state of spatial uncertainty that mirrors the temporal uncertainty of its residents' lives. The town does not have a fixed location because its residents do not have a fixed time. Both are consequences of the same fundamental alteration of the rules that govern how things normally work. There is also a structural reading that does not require the contamination theory and that connects to the institutional capture analysis we have been developing. A town that cannot be fixed on a map cannot be regulated. It cannot be investigated by a single federal authority with consistent jurisdiction. It cannot be held to a single state's environmental standards, or a single state's criminal statutes, or a single state's electoral rules. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is its most effective legal shield. Burns's plant has never faced serious federal regulatory action, despite 342 documented safety violations, because the regulatory authority that would bring that action depends on a clear jurisdictional claim that Springfield's shifting geography prevents. If you cannot say with certainty what state Springfield is in, you cannot say with certainty which state's attorney general has standing to act, which EPA regional office has authority, which federal district court has jurisdiction. The ambiguity is useful to everyone operating outside the law in Springfield, to Burns, to Quimby, to Tony, to any of the various forces that have arranged the town's affairs in ways that would not survive sustained regulatory attention. Springfield cannot be found on a map, because finding it on a map would mean finding it, and being found means being subject to the mechanisms of accountability that being unfindable currently exempts it from. The show tells you this directly in the episode called Behind the Laughter, the season 11 mockumentary that briefly places Springfield in a specific state, northern Kentucky, in the original broadcast, a different state entirely in syndicated reruns. The show gave you the answer and then changed the answer depending on what version of the episode you watched. The location is not stable even when the show attempts to commit to it, because commitment would mean accountability. And accountability is the one thing Springfield's configuration has been engineered to prevent. Springfield floats between states so that nobody can fix a badge to it. That is the mystery of the geography. Not where Springfield is, why it refuses to be anywhere. Expansion Block 9 Additional Mystery. The Simpsons predictions and what they actually show. The Simpsons has been predicting the future for 3 decades. This is the claim that the internet repeats with such regularity that it has become a meme format as much as a serious observation. The show depicted a Trump presidency 16 years before it happened. The show depicted the Disney-Fox merger before it happened. The show depicted a smartwatch before they existed, a flu pandemic starting in Asia, the Higgs boson mass, autocorrect failures, video calling. The list grows every year as researchers and enthusiasts hunt through the show's archive for new correspondences between fictional content and subsequent reality. The standard explanation from the show's own creators is straightforward and almost certainly correct. They throw enough darts. 800 episodes across 36 years, each containing dozens of jokes and references and satirical observations, produces a statistical density of content large enough that some of it will, by pure probability, align with future events. The Simpsons does not predict the future. It generates enough content that some of it will resemble the future when the future arrives, and confirmation bias ensures that the matches are remembered while the misses are forgotten. This explanation is right. It is almost certainly the primary mechanism, but it does not explain everything. And the things it does not explain are worth examining not because they suggest something supernatural, but because they reveal something real about how the show works. The show's writing staff has, across its golden era especially, been one of the most credentialed in television history, multiple writers holding degrees from Harvard, Yale, MIT. Significant backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, political theory, economics, and the hard sciences. These are not people guessing at the future through intuition. They are people who read the present more carefully than most, who understand pattern recognition and trend analysis, and the specific skill of extrapolating current trajectories to their logical conclusions. What looks like prediction is usually projection. The writers observed Trump's decades-long flirtation with political ambition and projected, if this continues, a Trump presidency is the absurdist logical endpoint. The Disney-Fox merger was projected from media consolidation trends that were already accelerating when the joke was written. The smartwatch was projected from the obvious direction of miniaturizing technology. The pandemic joke was projected from epidemiological reality that was already visible to anyone paying attention to how global travel and viral transmission interact. These are not predictions. They are careful observations of existing trajectories, pushed forward to their natural conclusions. And the writing staff that produced them was, in its best period, exactly the kind of collective intelligence that is good at this kind of projection. But here is what the prediction phenomenon actually demonstrates about the show. Beyond the statistics of content volume and the skills of the writing staff, Springfield is America. Not a metaphor for America. Not a satirical representation of America. An actual, accurate model of America, built from careful observation by intelligent people who understood what they were observing. The show predicted the future because it accurately diagnosed the present. And the present, correctly diagnosed, generates its own future with reasonable reliability. The Trump presidency was not a surprise to anyone who understood the trajectory of American celebrity culture, economic anxiety, and political fragmentation in 2000. The Disney-Fox merger was not a surprise to anyone who understood the trajectory of media consolidation. The surveillance culture was not a surprise to anyone who understood the trajectory of digital technology and institutional power. The show understood these trajectories. It built them into Springfield. And Springfield being an accurate model of America means that Springfield's trajectories become America's trajectories, the model, and the modeled converging over time. Springfield does not predict America. Springfield is America. Earlier, the show built a town out of the elements of American life in their essential forms, free of the contingent details that make the real America feel unpredictable. And when you look at the essential forms rather than the contingent details, the future is more legible than it appears from inside the contingency. Burns was always every fossil fuel billionaire who would ever exist. Quimby was always every politician who would ever hold office through corruption and name recognition. The school was always every underfunded educational institution in every declining town, in every era, when the dominant employer needed compliant workers more than it needed educated citizens. The predictions are real, but what they reveal is not the show's access to the future. They reveal the show's accuracy about the present. And the present keeps producing the future the show described, because the show understood what the present was actually made of. That is the genuine mystery of the predictions. Not that the show somehow accessed information about what would happen, but that the show understood what was already happening clearly enough that what would happen was, in retrospect, obvious. Most of us did not see it. The show did. And it showed us every week in jokes. And we laughed, and we moved on, and the predictions came true one by one, and we kept marveling at each one as though each one were a fresh surprise, rather than the logical continuation of a pattern the show had been carefully documenting for decades. Expansion Block 10. Additional Mystery. Mona Simpson and the Full Scope of Burns's Damage. The story of Mona Simpson, Homer's mother, the woman who disappeared when Homer was young, the radical who fought against Burns's biological weapons lab, is the most complete single account the show provides of how Burns's empire has organized the damage it has done to the Simpson family specifically. We have addressed elements of this throughout the video, but the full scope of the Mona storyline deserves its own space because it is, when assembled whole, one of the darkest and most systematically devastating things the show has ever constructed. Mona Bouvier Simpson was not a radical before Burns. She was a housewife in Springfield in the late 1960s. The radicalization the show depicts is not presented as a personality defect or a political pathology. The show is careful to establish that her activism was a genuine moral response to genuine wrongdoing. Burns was operating a biological weapons laboratory in Springfield, not adjacent to Springfield, in Springfield. In the same town where he would later build his nuclear plant. The same town where Homer would grow up and work and raise his children. Before the nuclear contamination, Before the safety violations, before the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers, before all of that, Burns was manufacturing weaponized pathogens in the middle of a residential community, and Mona Simpson found out about it. What she did in response is the show's most direct depiction of successful resistance to Burns's power. She joined a group of activists. They infiltrated the laboratory. They destroyed the biological agents stored inside. They prevented whatever Burns had been planning to do with those agents. And then Mona made a mistake. A human mistake, the kind that does not reflect poorly on her character, but that reflects poorly on the consequences that flow from exposing yourself to someone with Burns's resources and Burns's appetite for retaliation. She stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Burns. She looked at the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, lying on the ground, and she helped him up, and he saw her face. The retaliation was immediate and total. He reported her to the FBI. She became a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him what was happening or give him the information that would allow him to understand why his mother was gone. She kissed Homer goodnight while he was sleeping, and she left. And Homer woke up to a world without her. He was 6 years old. The story of what that absence did to Homer is the psychological foundation of his entire adult characterization. The desperate need for approval from authority figures. He cannot leave a job where the boss cannot remember his name because the stability of the employment is more terrifying to lose than the indignity of the anonymity. The clinginess with Marge, the terror of abandonment so deep that even small relational disruptions produce outsized anxiety. The compulsive need to be liked, to be included, to be part of something rather than alone. The willingness to endure humiliation and abuse rather than risk the alternative, which is isolation. All of this traces back to the morning he woke up and his mother was not there, and it all traces back to Burns. Burns did not plan for Homer to become his safety inspector, but Burns did plan for the world that produced Homer. He reported Mona to the FBI. He pursued the case against her with the specific vindictiveness that a man of his resources can sustain indefinitely. He kept her from coming home. He kept her from her son. He produced, through deliberate retaliation against a woman who had destroyed his weapons laboratory, the psychological conditions that would eventually make Homer Simpson the specific kind of person who could be employed at a nuclear power plant in the capacity of safety inspector without ever becoming a genuine threat to its continued operation. Homer's incompetence is partly the result of radiation exposure and partly the result of the crayon and partly the result of a childhood organized around the absence of the person who might have given him enough of a foundation to become something different. All three causes intersect. All three point, in the end, toward the same source. The crayon lodged in Homer's brain since childhood. The show makes much of the fact that no Springfield doctor ever discovered or removed it. This is presented as evidence of medical incompetence, which is the most charitable reading. The less charitable reading is that the medical establishment in Springfield, which is deeply embedded in the same institutional network that Burns controls, found it useful not to look too carefully. A Homer with the crayon removed the Homer, who briefly emerges when it is temporarily taken out, brilliant and articulate and capable of understanding his own situation, is a Homer who might start asking questions about who employs him and why, and what the employment has been doing to his body and his family. Better to leave the crayon where it is. And when the crayon was eventually removed, and Homer became briefly the person he might have been, the clarity was unbearable. Not because Homer could not handle the truth about Burns, but because he could handle it perfectly well. He understood it clearly. He saw the full architecture of his own suffering, and the understanding produced not liberation but despair, because understanding changes nothing in Springfield. The mechanism, the principle, and the pauper episode shows us explicitly the collective endorsement of comfortable lies. The legal criminalization of inconvenient truth applies to Homer's understanding of his situation, just as it applies to Armin Tamzarian's deception. Homer can see clearly, and seeing clearly in Springfield produces the specific experience of being the real Seymour Skinner, arriving in your own town with irrefutable evidence of the truth, and having the town vote to exile you. The truth does not set you free in Springfield. The truth gets you tied to a train car. Homer chose the fog because the fog was survival. Because the alternative, carrying the full weight of what had been done to him and to his mother and to his family across 3 generations, with no ability to change any of it, no institutional support for the attempt, no community capable of organizing around the account, even if he could articulate, it was simply not livable. He chose the fog, and it was the right choice, in the specific terrible logic of Springfield. And somewhere in whatever medical facility Mona Simpson spent her final years in before she died, having run from burns her entire adult life, having missed everything: Homer's childhood, his adolescence, his marriage, the birth of his children, the decades of ordinary life that she was never allowed to witness, somewhere in that place, a woman who had done the right thing paid the full price for it. And Homer, whose fog never quite reached the depth needed to cover the feeling of missing her, sat beside her at the end and held her hand and felt the 34 years pressing down on them both. No joke, no reset, just the weight. That is the Mona Simpson mystery. Not a mystery in the conventional sense the show told you most of it across the Mother Simpson episode and the subsequent episodes that returned to her story, but a mystery in the sense that the full scope of it, assembled whole and held without the comedy covering it, is something the show was never quite willing to fully present. Burns reported a woman to federal authorities for destroying his biological weapons. She spent the next 3 decades in hiding. Her son grew up without her, became cognitively impaired by the environment her enemy controlled, spent his adult life employed by the man who took her, and never fully connected the dots. 3 generations of damage. 1 man's retaliation. 1 woman's mistake of helping someone she should have left on the floor. The show has been sitting with this quietly across 30 seasons, carrying it in the background of 100 episodes about Homer at the plant, and Homer with the family, and Homer choosing the fog. It knows what it is carrying. It chose, as Homer chose, to let the comedy cover most of it. Only occasionally, in the episode's quietest moments, does the full weight surface. Expansion Block 11 Final Extended Meditation on watching and why we keep coming back. Before the outro, before the good night, one more thing. We have spent this entire video examining the structure underneath Springfield, the contamination and the corruption and the school and the mob and the marriage and the silence and the fog and the loop. We have built a picture of a town that is, by almost any accounting, a place where the ordinary conditions for a good human life have been systematically undermined by forces that benefit from those conditions not existing. And then we said, at the end of it all, that the show loves Springfield, that the love is real, that the family on the couch is the real subject and everything else is context. But there is something more to say about why the love persists in the face of all that context, and it requires going back to the beginning of tonight's journey, back to Maggie, who chose silence as the wisest response to the available evidence, who spent the word she had on the person who mattered most and then sealed the rest away. Maggie's silence is not nihilism. She is not silent because the world is not worth speaking to. She is silent because she has correctly assessed the conditions under which speaking is useful and the conditions under which it is not, and she has calibrated her output accordingly. She spends words where they matter. She withholds them everywhere else. And what this means, what this says about the child who made this assessment at an age when most human beings are still working on controlled vocalization, is that she has found a way to be present in a situation she cannot change without being destroyed by it. She loves her family. She watches them with the specific attention of someone who loves the people she is watching. She intervenes when they are in danger. She performs her impossible competences in the moments when they matter and conceals them everywhere else. She is in the situation, fully, with all the intelligence she possesses, and she has found a way to hold the situation without it crushing her. This is the mystery the show has never quite asked directly. How do you love something that is also a trap? How do you stay in a place that has been designed to contain you and find, within that containment, a life that is genuinely worth living? How do you be the person you are, fully, inside a structure that was built to prevent exactly that? Maggie does it through silence. Homer does it through fog. Marge does it through sustained, extraordinary, quietly heroic competence. Lisa does it through refusing to stop raising her hand even after decades of insufficient response. Bart does it through the specific persistence of continuing to be exactly himself in the face of everything that tells him he is wrong. Each of them has found a way. Each of the ways is imperfect, is costly, is the specific kind of solution that a specific person finds for a specific impossible situation. None of them is free, but all of them are present. All of them are in the rooms of their house on Evergreen Terrace. Actually, they're actually loving each other, actually inhabiting their lives with something that looks from a certain angle, in a certain quality of light, like dignity. And we watch them because we recognize the problem they are solving, not necessarily in the dramatic, nuclear contamination, mob-controlled, institutionally captured form that Springfield presents it, but in the more ordinary form that most human lives take, the specific imperfections of the specific life you are actually living, the specific constraints of the specific context you are actually in, the specific question of how to be fully yourself inside a situation that was not designed with you in mind. Everyone who watches The Simpsons is solving some version of this problem. The show knows this. It built Springfield as the version of this problem that could be seen clearly, precisely because it is extreme, because the nuclear plant and the mob and the corrupt politicians and the floating timeline and the frozen ages make the structure visible in a way that the more ordinarily imperfect versions of the same problem are not. And the answer the show offers, the answer it delivers, not through dialogue or explicit statement, but through the accumulated weight of 800 episodes, through the couch gag and the theme song and the opening credits, and every episode ending with the family intact, is this. You stay present. You love what you love, as fully as you can, inside whatever constraints the situation places on the loving. You choose the fog, or you choose the clarity, or you choose the silence, or you choose the raised hand, or you choose the comedy, whatever version of coping is most aligned with who you actually are. And you come home. Every episode, every Sunday night, every time the credits roll, you come home, and the family is there, and it is enough. It is not enough in the sense of being sufficient. The contamination is real, and the corruption is real, and the constraints are real, and the damage is real. None of that is enough. None of that is close to enough. But the love is real, and the family is real, and the couch is real. And somewhere in the space that the show creates between what is and what should be, between the damage and the love, between the trap and the warmth inside it, somewhere in that space is the thing that 36 years of audience watching has been reaching for. Not the answer, not the resolution, not the moment when everything is fixed and the contamination is cleaned up and Burns faces consequences and the school becomes the school it should be and Marge gets to be fully herself and Homer's fog lifts permanently and Lisa finally finishes the puzzle. Just the family. Just the house. Just the specific warmth that this specific configuration of people produces when they are together, intact, present. That is the whole show. That is every mystery, reduced to its essential form. That is what Springfield actually is. And now you know. Sleep well. Supplementary block the mysteries. We did not rank. Smaller threads that point toward the same center. Before we close the full ranking, there are threads we touched on in passing that deserve a few more moments, because they each illuminate a slightly different angle of the larger picture, and because the sleep you are sliding toward will be richer for having these settled. The first thread, Ned Flanders and the programming that replaced his character. Ned Flanders is, on the surface, the most straightforwardly good person in Springfield. He is kind, he is generous, he is patient with Homer's consistent failure to be the neighbor Homer theoretically wants to be. He is devout without being sanctimonious, at least in the early seasons. He is in every visible way a better man than Homer Simpson, and the show has always known this, and used the gap between Ned and Homer as a reliable source of both comedy and, occasionally, genuine pathos. And then the show revealed what Ned's goodness actually is. The episode is Hurricane Neddy from Season 8, and it is one of the most quietly devastating pieces of character work in the show's entire run. Ned's house is destroyed by a hurricane. The community, in a moment of genuine solidarity, rebuilds it. The rebuild is incompetent. Homer's leadership has produced a structure that collapses almost immediately, and Ned, confronted with this specific accumulation of disappointments, breaks. He does not break in the way that a person breaks under ordinary emotional pressure. He breaks in the way that a structure breaks when the mechanism that has been holding it under tension finally fails. He screams. He insults everyone. He says things he has been holding inside for years, possibly decades, things that the carefully maintained surface of his personality has been preventing from emerging through the sustained application of something that the episode eventually names. He is institutionalized, and in the facility, his history is revealed. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, being of the beatnik persuasion, did not believe in conventional discipline and took him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist applied what the show describes as aversion therapy, a sustained program of behavioral conditioning designed to suppress the aggression and produce the compliant, kind, patient person that Ned is now. It worked. The conditioning produced exactly the behavioral profile that was intended. But the conditioning produced it by building a psychological cage around whatever Ned actually was before the process began. Not by resolving the aggression, by suppressing it. By constructing a surface so thoroughly committed to kindness and patience that the thing underneath could not find expression even under extreme provocation, until it could. What this means for our understanding of Ned's goodness is significant. His kindness is not a character trait in the organic sense, the expression of a fundamental orientation toward the world that developed naturally from his nature and his experience. It is a conditioned behavior, a programmed output, the specific result of a sustained intervention in his psychological development that replaced his authentic response patterns with ones that his parents and their psychiatrist found more socially acceptable. His forgiveness of Homer, after Homer's selfishness, directly caused Maude's death, and Homer's selfishness did cause Maude's death. The show is clear about this. The t-shirts that should have hit Homer hit Maude instead because Homer was dodging them. That forgiveness is not grace. It is the programmed response of a man whose psychology was constructed to produce forgiveness, regardless of the stimulus. He cannot not forgive. The option was removed before he was old enough to choose. And this raises a question about what Ned's virtue actually is worth in the moral accounting the show consistently does through its depiction of the characters. If goodness is the product of conditioning rather than choice, is it goodness? If Ned is kind because he was trained to be kind and his training was so thorough that the alternative was removed from him, what exactly is the moral content of his kindness? The show does not answer this directly. It is a philosophical question that sitcoms are not typically equipped to answer directly. But it places the question in front of you through the Hurricane Nettie revelation and leaves you with the specific discomfort of realizing that Springfield's most reliably good person is reliably good because someone intervened in his development before he was capable of choosing who to be. And then there is the theological element that the show introduces without fully developing. God talks to Homer. This is canonical. Multiple episodes establish that Homer has had direct conversations with God, actual, genuine, depicted on screen conversations with a divine being who appears to exist within the show's universe and who has spoken to Homer specifically. Homer, who sleeps through church, who does not particularly think about his relationship to divinity, who would cheerfully sell his soul for a donut. Homer gets direct divine access. Ned Flanders, who has organized his entire life around his faith, who goes to church every Sunday, who reads the Bible, who prays, who has made his religious commitment the organizing framework of his existence. Ned has never received direct communication from the God he has given his life to. The show knows this is ironic. It uses it as a joke in various episodes. But the joke contains a theological observation that is genuinely unsettling if you follow it. The show's universe contains a God who is reachable, who speaks to specific people, who engaged with Homer and told him things and received Homer's responses. And this God has not spoken to Ned, the most faithful person in Springfield, the person who has sacrificed the most for his faith, and who has received the least conventional reward for it. This person is not on the receiving end of the divine attention that Homer, who has made no particular effort in this direction, apparently commands. The show is depicting a universe in which God, like every other authority in Springfield, distributes attention according to some principle other than merit or devotion. The person who tries the hardest gets the least. The person who does not try particularly hard gets direct access. This is either a comic observation about the randomness of grace, or it is the show's darkest statement about the nature of the universe it has built. A universe that mirrors Springfield's power structure all the way up where the people at the top of the hierarchy are not there because they earned it or deserve it, where the people at the bottom are not there because of their failures, but where both positions are allocated by a system that does not reward what it claims to reward. Ned is the righteous man in an unrighteous universe. He does everything correctly and receives nothing for it because the universe does not operate on correctness. It operates on the same logic as Springfield on power and chance and the specific distribution of attention that serves whoever is at the top. And Ned, whose conditioning prevents him from fully feeling the rage this should produce, goes back to church every Sunday, smiling. The second thread, the Quickie Mart and what it means for Springfield's economy. Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon runs the Quickie Mart. He has run it since the show began. He is present in the show with a frequency that places him among the most prominent of the secondary characters, appearing in episodes across all 36 seasons, consistently present in the background of Springfield's social life. He is also, within the show's economic logic, one of the most interesting figures in town. He runs a convenience store that serves as the primary point of daily transaction for a significant portion of Springfield's population. He knows what people buy, when they buy it, what their daily habits look like, what their stress levels are by what they reach for. He has the specific, intimate knowledge of a person who sees their community one transaction at a time, every day. And he has been getting exploited by his corporate franchise structure for the show's entire run in ways the show depicts as comedy without examining the structure underneath. The Quick E-Mart is a franchise. Apu pays fees to a corporation that sets his prices, his inventory requirements, his operating hours, and the standards by which his performance is judged. He works extraordinarily long hours. The show has depicted him working shifts of implausible length with a regularity that suggests it is the norm rather than the exception. He earns, presumably, the residual after the franchise fees and the inventory costs and the overhead, which in the convenience store industry is typically thin. He is, in the economic sense, another version of the same story the show tells everywhere. A person of real capability. Apu has degrees, multiple of them. He is demonstrably intelligent. He runs a complex small business with reliability in a challenging retail environment, working hard within a system that captures most of the value he generates and returns to him enough to keep him working. He is Homer at the plant, in the different register of the small business owner. The faces are different. The mechanism is the same. The system that captures Homer's labor through the power plant employment relationship captures Apu's through the franchise agreement. Both of them are intelligent enough to understand their situation in the abstract. Neither of them has a practical alternative that is better than the situation they are in. Springfield's economy is built on this. Not just the plant, the whole town. Every institution in it is organized around the same principle. Extract as much value as possible from whoever is inside the institution, return as little as the minimum required to keep them from leaving, and ensure that the alternatives are not meaningfully better. The franchise extracts from Apu, the plant extracts from Homer, the school extracts from the teachers, the prison extracts from its inmates. The casino extracts from Marge. Every institution in Springfield is, at its core, an extraction mechanism, and the people inside each institution are the resource being extracted. This is not unique to Springfield. This is how most institutions work in most places. The show depicts it in Springfield with enough specificity and consistency to make it visible to separate it from the background noise of ordinary economic reality and show it as the specific, constructed, deliberately organized feature that it is. But because the show depicts it inside comedy, Apu's long hours are funny, Homer's incompetence at the plant is funny, the school's failures are funny, the extraction is metabolized as character texture rather than as structural critique. That is the show's deepest and most consistent technique. Place the structural observation inside the comedy. Let the comedy land first. Let the warmth cover the cold mechanics underneath. Let the audience leave feeling good about Springfield without quite examining why everything in Springfield is organized the way it is and whose interests that organization serves. The Quick E-Mart has been selling convenience and absorbing its owner across 36 years of screen time. The show has made you laugh at Apu's situation repeatedly and warmly and with genuine affection for the character. And somewhere in all that laughter, the structure underneath has been running exactly as designed. The third thread, the shortest. The Simpson marriage and time. One more thing about Homer and Marge, one that we touched on but did not fully develop. Their origin story has been told 4 times with different period settings. In each retelling, the core story is the same, but the era shifts 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, as the floating timeline drags their formative years forward to remain consistent with their depicted ages. This means their memories are not stable. Their history, the specific texture of who they were when they fell in love, the cultural context of their courtship, the specific era they navigated together in their youth has been revised multiple times. Each revision retains the emotional truth while changing the factual content. They fell in love the same way in every version. The music was different, the fashion was different, the specific references were different. If Homer and Marge were real, they would have one set of memories. They would know, clearly and in fixed form, when they met and what was happening in the world, and who they were to each other in the specific context of a specific time. They do not have this. Their memories have been revised. They are not continuous people with stable personal histories. They are recurring figures whose backstory gets updated to maintain narrative consistency with the show's production calendar. This is the floating timeline's most personal expression. It is not just that the characters do not age, it is that their past keeps changing to match the present they are being placed in. They cannot remember who they were at the start because who they were at the start keeps being revised. And within the world of the show, this means something. It means Homer and Marge are carrying the emotional residue of a history that they cannot fully access, that keeps shifting under their feet, that is held together by the feeling rather than the facts. They know they fell in love. They know the feeling of it. But the specific content of when and how and in what world this keeps being revised. This is, perhaps, the most honest version of what long marriages actually are. Not the stable archive of shared memory that they feel like from inside, but the accumulated weight of feeling, with the specific facts fading and shifting over time, with the love itself as the only constant that does not revise. Homer and Marge love each other. They have always loved each other. The specific content of how they came to love each other keeps changing, but the love remains. That is the most honest thing the floating timeline has ever produced, and it is enough to rest with. Closing meditation, the show that keeps running, and what it means that we let it. There is something we have not yet said directly about the experience of watching The Simpsons for 36 years that needs to be said before this video properly ends. The show has not been declining. This is a minority position, and it requires some support before we can leave it with you. The internet consensus, deep, well-established, essentially unquestioned in fan communities, is that The Simpsons peaked in its golden era, roughly seasons 3 through 8, and has been in decline ever since. The later seasons are longer, the plots are more absurdist, the emotional grounding is looser, the characterizations have drifted from their original specificity. The internet has been discussing when the show went bad for 20 years. The discussion is so settled that it has become a cultural shorthand. Simpsons quality is the reference point for long-running shows that outlast their creative peak. This consensus is not wrong, exactly. The show in its golden era was operating at a level of craft and emotional precision that the later seasons do not consistently match. The early seasons have a density of good jokes per minute that the later seasons do not sustain. The characterizations in the first 8 seasons are sharper, more grounded, more internally consistent. All of this is true. But here is what the decline narrative misses. The show at its diminished best is still doing something that almost no other television series has ever done. It is maintaining, across 36 years and 800 episodes and multiple shifts in the cultural landscape and the replacement of essentially its entire original writing staff, a consistent emotional relationship with its audience. You still recognize them. You still come back to them. You still feel something when the couch gag plays, and the family runs in from their different directions and arrives at the couch simultaneously, and the frame freezes, and the episode begins. That feeling, the specific warmth of returning to something familiar that has been waiting for you, has not diminished. It has deepened with time. The way long relationships deepen, not despite the imperfections that accumulate, but partly because of them. You know their imperfections now. You know every way the show has failed to be what it was at its best. You know the episodes that went wrong and the seasons that drifted and the characterizations that became caricatures of themselves. You know all of it, and you still feel the warmth when the couch gag plays. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, a very specific and very rare thing that the show has somehow maintained across conditions that would have destroyed most creative enterprises many years before reaching this point. The show's continued existence, at whatever quality level it operates at now, is itself the most complete expression of the thing it has always been about. The persistence of a family in a world that was not designed to support them, across conditions that should have ended them, in the face of every reason to stop and the absence of any structural guarantee that continuing makes sense. The show is Homer. It chose the fog. It chose the couch. It chose to keep coming home even when the house was not as good as it used to be, even when the neighborhood had changed, even when most of the original reasons for being here had been replaced by the accumulated momentum of simply having always been here. The show chose to persist, and persistence has its own dignity, separate from quality, the dignity of a thing that will not stop. The dignity of a family that keeps choosing each other past the point where the choice makes easy sense. The show keeps running because we keep watching. We keep watching because they keep coming home. They keep coming home because that is what the show has always been about. And so the mystery that opened this video, the mystery ranked at number 12, Maggie's first word and the 36-year silence that followed, it turns out to be the show's thesis statement in miniature. She said the most important word. She said it once, perfectly. She said it to the right person at the right moment. And then she sealed the vault and went back to watching, because the word had been spent and the watching was the work. The show has been doing the same thing. One word, delivered with precision, in the context where it would land most fully. This is a family, and this family loves each other, and that love is real, said once, at the beginning, maintained through 36 years of episodes. Never quite repeated in the same form because the first saying was complete, and everything since has been the watching. The being present in the situation without destroying it by demanding it become something it cannot be. The choosing, again and again, to stay. That is the show. That is the family. That is Springfield. And it is everything. One final thing before the outro. The 12 mysteries we ranked tonight are the show's most significant unresolved questions, ordered by concealment. But there is a 13th thing. Not a mystery exactly, but an observation that belongs here before we close. The Simpsons is the longest-running scripted primetime show in American television history. It has been on the air longer than most of its current audience has been alive. It has outlasted cultural movements and technological revolutions and political upheavals and the complete transformation of how Americans consume media and the death of the broadcast television model that gave it birth. It has outlasted everything, and it is still going. Whatever we said tonight about the contamination and the corruption and the loop and the trap and the structural impairment of the population, whatever the full account of what Springfield is, the family is still on the couch, still coming home, still intact. If that is a trap, it is the trap that outlasted everything built to contain free things. If it is a loop, it is the loop that has gone around more times than any loop in the history of American storytelling. Maybe that is the show's final answer to all the mysteries we examined tonight. Not the contamination theory, not the coma theory, not the institutional capture or the school that builds workers, or the marriage that is held together by more than love, or the silence that is smarter than anything that could be said. Just this, they are still there. After everything, despite everything, the family is still on the couch. And that is the only mystery that needed solving. Good night. Sleep well. The fog is warm tonight in Springfield, and the couch is waiting, and the family will be there when you come back. They always are. Additional closing reflection on sleep and Springfield, and the reason this video exists in this format. There is one last thing worth saying about why a video about The Simpsons is a video you watch to fall asleep to. The answer is not that the content is boring. The content is, if anything, the opposite of boring. It is dense with ideas, heavy with implication, built from observations that, taken seriously, reframe 3.5 decades of something most people feel they already understand. The reason you watch it in the dark, in the quiet, in the specific state between alertness and sleep, is that this is the state in which the most important things land correctly. Fully alert, you analyze. You argue with the premises. You assess the evidence. You maintain the critical distance that waking life requires of a person who needs to navigate a world with real consequences. Fully asleep, nothing lands at all. The words pass without register. The observations do not accumulate. But in the space between the specific quality of consciousness that comes late at night, when the day has finished asserting itself and the sleep has not yet arrived, things land differently, softer, without the defensive armor. The way music lands when you are almost asleep, and the melody enters directly without the usual interpretive layer between reception and feeling. That is the state in which the best things about The Simpsons land most truly. Because the best things about The Simpsons are not argument and evidence and structural analysis, though we have been using those tools all night to try to point toward the best things. The best things are feeling. The specific feeling of recognizing a family that is not your family but feels like your family. The specific feeling of a show that has been running your whole life and that will probably outlast you. The specific feeling of the couch gag and the theme song and Homer finding his way home and Marge being there and the children being somewhere in the house and the family being against all available evidence of how difficult families are and how imperfect households are and how much the world does to make connection difficult. The family being intact. In the dark, in the quiet, in the space between the day's end and the sleep, this feeling arrives without armor. You feel it as it was always meant to be felt, not as cultural analysis, not as sentimental attachment, as the specific relief of something familiar being exactly where you left it. Springfield is where you left it. The family is on the couch. The plant is still running on the horizon, green and warm. The school is closed for the night. The Quickie Mart is still open, because it is always open, because some things never stop being available to you. Maggie is watching from her high chair, in the dark of the house, with her words sealed away inside her like a light she is saving for the right moment. And the whole town is asleep, or almost asleep, or in the specific state between waking and dreaming that is the most honest state available to anyone in Springfield. Because in Springfield, the most honest things happen in the in-between. Just like they do here, tonight, in your room, in the dark, with the video almost finished and the sleep almost arrived. You are almost there. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. The family will be on the couch. They always are. Good night. A note on the ranking methodology and what it reveals. Before this truly ends, something brief about the ranking itself, about why the criterion we used, how hard the show worked to conceal each mystery, produces this particular ordering rather than some other ordering. The mysteries at the bottom of the ranking, Maggie's first word at 12, Sideshow Bob's revolving door at 11, Snowball 1 at 10 are not the least important. They are simply the most perfectly concealed. The show placed them inside experiences so warm, so funny, so reliably pleasurable that the examination never felt necessary. Who stops to ask hard questions about a moment as beautiful as Elizabeth Taylor whispering one word for a cartoon baby? The beauty was the concealment. The love was the hiding place. The mysteries in the middle of the ranking, the mob and the Halloween exemption and Grandpa's war record and the Burns-Smithers dynamic are the ones the show concealed inside comedy archetypes so established, so familiar, so efficiently funny that the structural content underneath never required attention. Fat Tony is funny because mob archetypes are funny. The Treehouse of Horror is delightful because horror parody is delightful. These are concealments that work through genre pleasure rather than emotional warmth. The mysteries at the top of the ranking, Lisa's proximity to the full picture at 5, Marge's identity question at 4, Springfield Elementary at 3, the marriage at 2, and what Springfield actually is at 1. These are the ones the show hid inside, the things it loved most. Inside Lisa's characterization, which the show adores. Inside the marriage, which the show built its entire emotional architecture around. Inside the school, which the show has depicted with such consistent fondness for its specific miseries, that 36 years of school comedy has become as warm as a memory. The deeper the love, the better the concealment. The show hid its most important observations inside the things it cared about most. Because caring about something makes you protect it, and the protection takes the form of the comedy and the warmth that keeps you from asking the hard questions. The hardest question, the one ranked at number 1, the one hidden inside the deepest love of all. What is Springfield? You know the answer now. You have always known it, Probably. In the way that you know things about the places and people you love, without quite articulating the knowledge, carrying it as a feeling, rather than a proposition, as the weight of something you understand without the words for what you understand. The words are, it is home, it is broken, it is loved, it is a trap, it is warm, it is the family on the couch, it is the contamination in the water. It is all of these simultaneously, inseparably, in the way that real places are always inseparably the beautiful and the broken things that coexist inside them. That is the answer. That is the ranking. That is everything. Sleep now. You have earned it. Springfield will be there in the morning. The family will be on the couch, exactly as you left them, exactly as they have always been, waiting for you to come home. The loop that holds everything together. One final observation, the last one before we truly close. Every theory we examined tonight, the contamination theory, the coma theory, the institutional capture reading, the prediction phenomenon, the floating timeline as mechanism of control, every single one of them arrives at the same conclusion through a different route. And the conclusion, stated in its simplest form, is this. Springfield does not change because it cannot change. And it cannot change because the people who benefit from it not changing have ensured that the mechanisms of change are systematically unavailable to the people who might otherwise use them. The education is calibrated to not produce the thinking the change requires. The cognition is impaired to not sustain the analysis the change requires. The memory is compromised to not retain the grievances the change requires. The institutional structure is captured to not respond to the pressure the change requires. The cultural reflex, the Springfield instinct to forget the catastrophe and return to normal, to vote to maintain the comfortable lie, to exile the bearer of inconvenient truth is practiced and consistent, by now, probably genuinely automatic rather than consciously applied. And within this entirely successful prevention of change, the Simpson family keeps loving each other. This is the mystery that is not a mystery. This is the thing that has been in plain sight since the first episode. Not hidden, not buried. Right there in the opening credits, in the arrangement of the characters, in the structure of the show's weekly rhythm, the world is organized to prevent the family from changing, and the family keeps choosing each other anyway. Not because they understand the world, not despite the impairment. Through it, around it, in the spaces it leaves, in the moments between the catastrophes when they are simply together, in the house, this is the thing that Burns cannot engineer. This is the thing that his wealth and his radiation and his institutional capture and his century of manipulation has not managed to prevent. The love is still there, still real, still warm. On the couch, in the house, on Evergreen Terrace, in Springfield, in the town that does not appear on any map, in the show that will not end, the love is still there. And now you can sleep. The pacifier and the word she kept. We started with Maggie, we end with Maggie. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She is sitting in her high chair in the house on Evergreen Terrace in the town that does not appear on any map, watching everything, saying nothing, carrying her one word inside her like a lantern she has not yet decided to unsheath. She watched us watching her, all night. She watched us examine her family, trace the contamination, map the institutional capture, follow the threads of every mystery back to their sources. She watched us build the full picture of what Springfield is, and why it is what it is, and what it has done to the people who live inside it. And she did not say anything, because she does not need to. She already said it, years ago, once, perfectly to the person it was meant for. And the word landed, and Homer's face changed, and the moment was real, and it has been real ever since, preserved in the amber of the show's permanent present, as real as anything in Springfield has ever been. She said, "Daddy," and that was enough. It was always enough. Sleep now. The house is quiet, the family is home. The plant is running on the horizon, casting its green light over the town that chose to forget, the town that exiled truth, the town that is a trap and a home, and everything in between. And in the house, in the high chair, in the room where the television has gone dark, a baby with enormous eyes and a sealed word in her pocket watches the world sleep. She has been watching a long time. She will keep watching until the moment arrives, until the right moment, until the word is worth spending again. And then she will say it. Good night. And one last thing, truly the last. If you made it here, to the very end of this, the end of all 12 mysteries, the end of the full account of what Springfield is, the end of the long, quiet journey through a town that does not appear on any map, then you have done something that very few people do with a show they love. You looked at it fully, you let the hardest questions land. You sat with the darkness alongside the warmth, the structure alongside the love, the trap alongside the home. That is the most honest way to love something. Not to protect it from examination by insisting it is only one thing, but to hold the whole of it, the broken parts and the beautiful parts, the contaminated parts and the warm parts, the couch and the cooling tower, and to love it as the complete and complicated thing it actually is. That is what the best Simpsons episodes do for the people in them, and it is what you just did for the show. Drop your location in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us what time it is. Tell us that you were here. Someone on the other side of the world is in the same dark room at the same hour with the same warmth settling over them as this video ends. You are not alone in this. You never were. Good night.